Mike, would you like to go ahead and begin the meeting?
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Rob. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you again. For those who were here yesterday, look forward to a productive session. We may begin.
All right.
Thank you.
Let me do a little bit of administrivia.
Okay.
You'll notice we've got two owls in the middle of the room. If you talk to the owl, the audio-visual thing works better. If you are holding a side conversation, owls have very good ears and they will pick it up, and the people who are joining us online will have a hard time hearing us. The bad news is it'll pick up your side conversations. We do record committee meetings. We also post the recordings online, so you need to know you are being recorded. For sign-in, there is a hard copy sign-in sheet over here to the left of Josh. If you are in the room, please give him your autograph. If you are online, our habit is to use chat as a virtual sign-in. So if you would list your name and your organization so we can record that you're here and spell your name right. Bathrooms and water fountains are out in the hall, kind of back to my left. If you need to get to the kitchen lunchroom area, Ryan or one of the ecology folks can help escort you back. The door is locked, so it's an access control thing. Make sure you signed in when you came into ecology and got an ecology badge. They do keep track of folks who are here. And remember to give it back when you leave. Lastly, we've got a front door exit. We've got a side door exit here in the meeting room. If for some reason we have to escape from this room, the meeting area is at the far side of the parking lot. We're not expecting a disaster, but that's the deal. Ryan, is there anything else we've got to tell them?
I don't think so.
All right. That's what I got. Rob.
Okay. Thank you. Today's meeting basically is going to talk about the progress being made at the WTP DFLA project. So, we've had these updates before. If people would note that these are called out in our work plan for the HAB, the main subject for the actual meeting. I'd also like to take some time in the end to discuss some of the actions that happened this last couple of weeks with regards to the NAS and FRDC and AOA and things of that sort. I think the first thing we're going to have to do is make sure that from the last, did anybody have any comments from our last meeting? Let me just review quick. We met, okay, gotta get the date right. Anyway, we've met twice in the last year where I assumed this position. One was in the summer where we got a really great discussion on the tank integrity. And then I guess the last one was more concentrated on administrative duties and activities. This is our first update for the year on the tank waste. Excuse me, this is the first update of the year on the DFLA project. I think, as it points out, did people get a chance to read the meeting minutes? Did you take a look at them? Go through anything that came up?
Right, so it turns out that under your operating guidelines, your chairs of committees and the chair of the board can certify that meeting minutes are accurate. So you actually don't have to do that as a full committee if you don't want. And that will actually, if we do that, will actually help us get stuff out and to you faster. So what I would propose is that if there are things that need to be improved or revised, and then after that, then Rob, you as chair could say they're good and post them.
So can you give me an idea of the time frame that those minutes are published out to people to review? before the next tank waste meeting? I mean, how much time do they have to read them?
So, is it the operating, there are 3 different sets of timeframes about when we're supposed to have meeting minutes out that we've got to iron out. But basically, the first draft is supposed to be out 2 weeks after a meeting.
Okay,
We got backlogged.
right,
So we are unbacklogging ourselves. So we should be giving you draft meeting minutes within 2 to 3 weeks of a meeting. Committee week stacks them up. I think you can then say, folks, get back to me in 2 weeks or 1 week, or that piece is real flexible.
okay, okay. So I guess what I'd like to do is ask the committee members to, as soon as they get that document, take a look at it while your memory's still fresh, and circle or whatever, and get it to me, and I'll put it in there. I did notice my name was listed a whole lot in that last one. I can't believe I talked that much. So now that we have that, I thought they were pretty good, especially in there. So, for the sake of expediency and to clear backlogs, I would say that they're okay, enter in the record. Anybody object? Please go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll do that.
Yeah.
And we'll try to keep up on that, so you don't get behind. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is, it says here nominations and candidate remarks. And Lacey, it's your show.
She knows how to reverse delegate. All right, so we are in the season where all the HAB committees elect their chair and vice chair for the calendar year. The committee chairs and vice chairs serve for 1-year terms, and elections are basically the first meeting of the calendar year. We don't currently have any nominations for chair or vice chair of this committee.
Can I make one?
I was gonna hope that somebody would.
I would like to nominate Rob Davis. I think he's done a great job and he should stay in the chair.
And I'm gonna nominate Rob Parmalee as vice chair. And that way we have the Rob team.
Rob and Rob. That confuses. Rob is a lot of work.
Okay, so the kicker is we don't voluntold people to have leadership. So Rob and Rob, are you willing to serve as chair and vice chair?
Yes, for this next year, I think that, my personal feeling is that we've been kind of backlogged from doing our jobs with all the administrative changes that we have. And we really need to get going. And I truly believe that if DOE asks, or if we feel that we need to give advice, we ought to be able to give it pretty promptly, like within a year. So I would really like to see that we have our IM meetings. We have 1 or 2 IM meetings to formulate what the committee should hear. And then we take it to the committee. The committee takes a look at it, gets back to the IMT on the corrections, usually 6 or 7 months later. And then by November, we should be able to bring it to the main board and ask for their approval on the advice. I think that I would like to work to that, and some on the AOA or some comments on the AOA that we'd like to make. We also have, I really believe that the FRDC, and I'd like to talk about this a little bit later, but the FRDC left an opening for the board to participate. And so we need to consider that. And so, Lacey, take over.
Okay, I'm gonna ask, Rob, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Not really. Rob had asked me at the last board meeting about participating as in this position, so I'm fine with it. I'm still learning quite a bit about what the HAB does, what the committee does. Also trying to sift through all of the information that we get to find out what's applicable and what is not to the individual committees. So I've got a bit of a learning curve, but you'll bear with me while I get through that. I guess.
So what are the questions for Rob and Rob from committee members? Anyone? All right, so you've got two options. We brought Lacey because we honestly didn't know if we would have one or how many nominations. So we were prepared for multiple nominations, and that's why Lacey is here to help with that. If there are no other nominations, your other option is to forego all the formal election stuff and do it by consensus. I mean, it's a consensus board. So if you would like to do it quickly, what you would do is tell me that you are in agreement with Rob and Rob, and we can move on.
In agreement.
In agreement. If you are online with us, let us know in the chat.
How many people do we have online?
We have, good question, we have 22 people online.
Welcome, 22 people online.
That's right. There are some overlaps, like Gary and I are, we're on, there's a little double counting, but yeah, there are 22 people online. All right, I am not seeing any objection to the nominees, so congratulations, Rob and Rob.
Okay, thank you. To get on with the meeting, this next speaker, Tom, and is he online? Or there he is.
He's live in
I
person.
can't see you down there. Okay, well, Tom's been a regular feature here at our HAB board meetings. I don't know, I first knew Tom probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, but with his, what's your title now?
Assistant Manager for Waste Treatment Plant.
That's right, okay. So as the assistant manager, he's been assigned responsibility, and he's updated us a year ago, and now he's gonna update us again. We're all excited to hear about the melter and Tisker and all those kind of things that are your feed factors and that. So take it away.
Yeah, so first, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm gonna use the style normally I have in the past for a provided slideshow, and I'm not gonna do that today. I'm gonna have more of a discussion and dialogue focused on kind of the big picture and where we're going and where we're at in that process. So hope that works for everyone. I'll start with DF law, and then we'll move our way into kind of the status of high-level waste as well, since we have been blessed with congressional funding to support advancing that mission as well. So from a DF law standpoint, I think everybody knows we started initiating melter heat up in October, ran into a challenge with our startup heaters, which are really the initial source of heat that both conditions the melter itself, and i.e. drying the refractory up. When we say condition, we're really talking about ensuring there's no moisture in the refractory and allowing the refractory to expand to its full size, because with heat stuff expands. And then the second step of that was when we had that failure, we took the appropriate approach, and I will say the people and everybody did a fantastic job of recognizing it, of tracking it, and then shutting the system down in a very safe and effective, methodical manner. Out of that, we went directly into an extent of condition, looking to ensure we understand not only the there are two other heaters that support the melt operations. One is the discharge heater, and the other one is the I'll tell you that we have solved that problem. We have replaced the component that had failed. We've replaced that component with a new technology component, because remember, a lot of this plant was purchased 10+ years ago. It had been in an installation process for that time. So we replaced that with new technology and tested those all the way through the full power range that we expect to use during startup itself, and that problem is solved. We also have validated that the discharge heaters don't have a similar failure mechanism, and therefore it is also solved. There is a vulnerability within the Joule heater, which is the heating source that actually keeps the molten pool of glass molten for the life of the plant. And we are going through testing as we speak to ensure that we've wrung out that system to ensure that it operates as planned. Out of that testing, which we're going into, which we should have complete towards the end of this month, we'll have two options. And it's too early to tell you exactly what where those land and dates, but one option is used as is. And the other option is to replace some components. And what we're doing from a supply chain standpoint is we're applying those components now as a mitigating measure, even if they're on the list for spare parts in the future. So we're going to mitigate I'll say the long lead procurement aspect of that by buying early to support spare parts program if we don't use them, or if we do use them, then they'll be on hand ready for installation going into solving that challenge and then getting us back into melter heat up. I think everybody knows that melter heat up is that first step along the journey of reaching hot commissioning. Once we get to melter heat up, we go through a very methodical process. All of this looking to practical time and with the lowest risk to both the facility and the workers. So we very methodically go through the process of introducing a simulant that doesn't produce any nitrous oxide or nitrogen oxides, NOx producing gas. I use the right terminology, which is probably the biggest hazard to the workforce, as well as the use of ammonia, which is the treatment for nitrogen oxides to that plant. So we will go through that initial treatment. We'll then go through a cold commissioning management assessment, which is looking at is the plant ready, the plant, paper, and people all ready to actually introduce those hazards into the facility, and those hazards are introduced through a chemical simulant. That simulant is what produces those hazards, and then the ammonia comes in as a treatment agent for the nitrogen oxides that are a byproduct of the melt pool. So again, we'll go through that very methodical process. We'll get a thumbs up. Think of the ORRs, the ORR process from a radiological side. This is really the chemical side of that. Extended period of time. Go ahead.
ORR is?
Operational readiness review. I was going to get there. I'm going to come back to that one. Good reminder. So we'll go through the process of going through an extended period of cold commissioning. We go into what we call an environmental demonstration performance test, where we actually spike the melter beyond what it's expected to see from a feed perspective to ensure that our off-gas system performs as planned. That's a test that is mandated by the regulations. So we'll go through that process. And then finally, we'll go into the operational readiness review that looks at the last components, which says are all of the plant, paper, and people ready, and hazards analysis planning for the radiological component of the waste that we would introduce during hot commissioning. So that kind of lays out a 18 to 24 month schedule once we go back into restart. And that's variable. That'll all vary depending on how we go through each of those steps. But in general, it's roughly 18 months of time from the time we go back into that process. But again, a lot of opportunity, and we are able to take this time while we are going through those challenges to actually advance plan, pull things that were once parallel now in series, because it was resource driven, not time. It was more resource driven and time driven. So we're actually getting more operator training, better planning for those future evolutions, because we're able to do that now while we're going through that process of ensuring the vulnerabilities in the melter supply aren't there, and ultimately bringing this plant online effectively and efficiently going forward. Go ahead.
Tom, at the last board meeting last year, there was a comment from one of the board members that the melter 1 may have been damaged during that process, and I just want you to confirm that.
Melter 1 is not damaged.
Okay.
Melter 1 is 100%. They did an absolutely fantastic job of recognizing the failure of the startup heater and then shutting the plant down in a very methodical manner that provided no damage to the facility and or melters going through that process.
Thank you.
Question on the operational readiness review.
Yeah.
When I was at Fernald and we had an operational readiness review, we had experts from all over the DOE complex involved. Will you have the same, or is it more of an in-house thing?
Nope, 100%. It's an external. It'll be led by Ed Westbrook of headquarters. He is our operational readiness review head lead. He has a team that will be comprised of experts from all over our complex. And we'll come and look at that as an ORR. But what's unique about WTP is he will actually be here on site shadowing all the way starting at the CCMA, the Coal Commissioning Management Assessment process. And I'll try to not use their acronyms. My Coal Commissioning Management Assessment process, my EP drills. So he'll take credit for that those steps of the ORR required by our DOE orders throughout this process. So he will be ensuring that, yes, the facility is ready. We normally have it all done at the end. He's gonna make sure that, yep, we as a department aren't missing something from a coal commissioning standpoint when we introduce the nitrogen oxide hazard and then the ammonia to treat that hazard. So he'll be working us all the way through that process. So it is an external team.
How long is that planning to take?
For what?
The operational readiness review.
So the readiness review is as I said, this is a unique, with WTP, we're taking credit throughout time. So we'll start that likely this summer or late this calendar year with the CCMA. So he'll be here on site for the CCMA, Coal Commissioning Management Assessment, looking at the chemical hazard component, and his team will stay engaged all the way until we complete the operational readiness review, which really is dependent on all those steps along the way. What do we find? If it goes perfectly smoothly, it could be 13, 14 months. If we find challenges, which I expect some, would be 16, 18 months. And if it's on the outside, I mean, I don't want to guess because I don't know, but it could be farther than that if we found something else. But it's all based on what we find. The key is we introduce hazards in a very methodical way that we don't put people, plant, or paper at risk going through that process. Same as they do at SWPF and other sites, as they'll be done across the complex.
There any current or future permit modifications planned with ecology
So
or
the
Department of Health?
The Department and Ecology have worked fantastic together. Today, and this is for DF law, I'm gonna use the DF law numbers. For all of DF law, we have 67 of 77 permits, and all of the remaining permits are on schedule to be delivered well in advance of the need. So we have no permitting concerns for DF law components to support operations going forward. Big kudos to the ecology and health teams in working with us to get to that point.
Matt Campbell online, you've got a question about timing?
Yes, I just wanted to verify that's 18 to 24 months before waste processing will actually begin.
Yeah, so the reality is it's a variable, right? So likely we're, I would say somewhere between, most likely is somewhere between 14 and 16 months. But again, it all is depending on hot commissioning of the plant. I'm not talking about melt or heat up. So want to make sure I'm clear here. We're not talking about melt or heat up. We're talking about hot commissioning of the plant. Is somewhere in that 16 to 18 month range once we go back into melt or heat up, which is I'll say in the near term. Fuel heater resolution, which we expect to know the path forward on that by the end of this month, roughly.
I've got Tom Galeotto in queue, and I also, because we're sort of doing Ryan.
Let me interject. I'm going to switch the mic really quick. It's having some issues. So I'm going to switch to the bar instead, just so we don't lose anybody online that's trying to listen to what we're saying.
Okay, so Ryan's working on some technical stuff. Sometimes our owls have minds of their own. Tom has a question, and then I want to make sure that I check in with the ecology folks for a regulatory perspective too.
Yep, absolutely.
Tom Galeotto?
Yeah, Ruth, I'm having a little trouble with the audio. I hope you can hear me. My question for Tom Fletcher is, do you have any idea when TISCR operations will restart for the initial feed materials for DF Law?
So I think it's important to note that TISCR has already produced about 380,000 gallons of pre-staged feed for us, and we expect that will go back into operation in the coming month, with a campaign to support the initial run by the end of this year, roughly. So they'll have all the pre-staged waste feed for feeding WTP by the end of this year is the goal.
Great, thank you.
Questions on
TISCR, right. Tank
And I-
site cesium removal. Yeah.
Okay, I know that you're more DF law oriented and TISCR, not your strong suit, but Can you tell me about the feed? Is the feed coming in within the ICD 30 specs?
So Tisker is operating phenomenally and producing feed well within the waste acceptance criteria requirements of ICD 30.
Okay.
So that is, Tisker is truly working fantastically for removing the cesium and strontium as well as the suspended particles, and we're well within the limits of ICD 30.
Right.
So I've got Cam and Mia. Someone could
I can.
Is the relationship between the contractor and the.
Yeah, and so interface control documents define what the interface point. So this is the handoff between tank farms and WTP from a incoming feed perspective. So what they produce matches what I can accept.
And then I do really want to connect with the regulator.
Okay, so I'm really happy to hear that this is working so well. But there was a facility that was designed and construction started to do this before Fisker came along, be a little bit more remote. Is that facility still envisioned to be completed for the full operation of tankless treatment?
So there was no facility ever started construction. They were in the CD1 phase at that point in time, moving towards CD2, which isn't getting to the baseline. When we created Tisker, we created a sub-project of the low activity waste pretreatment system, and then defined a second sub-project that would use the operational experience coming out of the tank site cesium system to then look at what the future holds. Delmar today, and Delmar is responsible for this area. Delmar is going through an alternative analysis, looking at that second sub-project right now, and we'll be working our way through the 413 process to define that path forward. So there is no true path until he works through that process.
All right, so I've got Chris, you hold. Normally when we do we have a presentation and then we check in with the regulators, and because this is a more free-flowing conversation, it's easier to forget the other agencies on the TPA. Ryan, who do we have from ecology? They've got a perspective.
Yeah, we've got Dan McDonald online.
Dan, do you have a perspective you want to throw in at this point?
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Tom. Thanks for your perspective. Appreciate it. First of all, I agree that the extent of condition was a very wise thing to undertake. And secondly, I would offer that looking forward to supply chain issues and mitigating them now is a good idea. And thanks for the kudos on the permitting. We're doing everything we possibly can to keep up and keep things moving. One of the things that I want to remind the board about, and Tom is surely aware of this, that DFLAW is not just one facility, it's a system. And in addition to the melters, there's a variety of other things: ventilation, water, pneumatics, hydraulics. There's a variety of other things that are going on. So I would ask the board not to lose sight of the fact that, yes, the melter is certainly important, but there are other things in lab. There are other things in balance of facilities that need to be managed as well, so that coming forward, this thing starts as a system and continues to run as a system. So I would ask the board not to lose sight of the fact that there are a variety of things, if you will, in the shadows that are occurring in a variety of support facilities, in addition to what's going on in DFLAW melter land, to keep this system moving forward. Tom?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, Dan. It is a system. It's a system of systems in a lot of ways. And it is a site-wide machine that we as a team have created an integration team from all 6 prime contracts as well as all 4 assistant managers that truly ensure that we are operating as a system and managing as a system, because any one component can take the overarching facility down or overarching process down. So Dan's absolutely correct.
Which is why there are 67 to 77 permits involved. Oh, Chris, did I see your hand?
Yeah. So if you're able to start the melter heating again at the end of this month or first part of March or thereabouts, that means about a 5-month slip in schedule just for the melter. Building on what Dan McDonald just said, since there's numerous other parts of the system, other systems and subsystems involved, have you been able to to make up that schedule slip by concentrating on other parts of the system, so that you're not overall delaying by 5 months, hot commissioning, operational readiness review, so on and so forth?
So we're doing everything we can. That's what I was talking about, working in parallel. We're doing everything we can for those activities where it would make sense. We had training built in at certain stages along the ways from an operator training, just proficiency standpoint. We're taking some of those and moving them into now because they can operate those subsystems that would have been being operated. Procedure validation, we're going through procedure validation. So I don't think it's going to be a 1-for-1, but it's not a 0-for-1 either. So there is some amount of slip that will occur driven by what we've experienced. But remember, that's planned. That's a planned part of this equation. When you look at the risk of starting up a one-of-a-kind facility, you expected some of that risk to be experienced and to be realized through that process, and was anticipated when we started this process planned when we baselined in 2016. In total, there was 21 months assumed for risk from a departmental standpoint and a consent decree standpoint. That had been impacted, of course, and a lot of what we're seeing is the impacts of COVID up until this point, and now we're just experiencing some of that risk that we had planned and expected to some extent.
Tom, let me add on to that a little bit. I would ask the board to remember that this system is what's called interdependent. The interdependencies are required, and some of those interdependencies require that A happens before B, before C, before D. So in a lot of cases, some things will in fact have to wait until the earlier things are put to bed and put to rest, and then they can move on, because C and D may require A and B to be working correctly before C and D can be tested. So there's some of those interdependencies that we cannot overcome, and we're just going to have to take those as they come. Tom?
Completely agree, Dan. And that's why I said I don't think it's a 1-for-1. I don't think it's a 1-day loss for a 1-day slip, but I think it is some portion of a day. We will see some impact of less than 5 months. Exactly. It's hard to tell. I mean, it really is. I mean, you're waiting for all those to come out and then to see how the operator performs and how those procedures work. There's always going to be in a first of a kind evolution, those I'll say instantaneous needs of fixes and challenges. And what I think is going to be most beneficial out of all this is the speed and pace we're able to make changes. I've seen a significant increase of operator flexibility, still following process and procedure, but the ability to make those changes much faster now than when we started. So that pace of operation is starting to pick up, which will help the long-term plant as we go through this. We would have been learning that along the way, and now we're learning that during this downtime and picking up that pace of operation. And we're really being able to turn out things way faster than we were 5 or 6 months ago. So that really focuses on the paper side, because you can't do any work without paper. I think everybody in this room understands that.
Yeah, 29 people online. Are there folks online who have questions and want to jump in the conversation?
Do we have anybody from
Yeah, let me continue on then with some of your descriptions and discussions. One is that in the interview you had with Wayne Barber with the weapons complex, or you were quoted. But there was also follow on that we were having to do something about the reliability of power to the melter and with BPA. And so what is the status of that activity?
So and it's not directly connected to DF law, but there is what we call a North Loop replacement project that's ongoing. And it is focused on replacing the north power line. So the South Loop was replaced a number of years back. This is replacing the North Loop power line. It's tied into the outage of, I don't want to give you the date. I can get the date, but it's tied into the outage of Energy Solutions when they do their refuel. So they're working to get that line all put in place, and it's a cooperative agreement, or we work together with BPA to get that in place, and that will provide upgraded, reliable feed. Because remember, one's a newer line, one's a 1950s vintage line. So it brings that 1950s vintage line up to today's technology, and then we'll tie that in to provide the second source of incoming feed. I have 2 feeds today. I'll continue to have 2 feeds up until that tie-in point. It just provides additional reliability to A6 substation, which feeds WTP.
Okay. And that was Energy Northwest, not Energy Solutions.
Sorry, yes.
Correct.
Tie into Energy Northwest. You are correct if I said Energy Solutions. Sorry about that.
The other thing is that I would like you to walk us through the off-gas system. And, a little bit about how, where the iodine's trapped, or if anything comes out of the mercury or whatever?
So the off-gas system is designed to capture all of the process, and I don't want to get into the infinite level of detail because it's probably one of the most complicated off-gas systems from a chemical standpoint, and it would totally baffle most people. So in general, we have two off-gas systems, primary and secondary. Primary is really there to cool it down, drop out particulates, and it's focused on each melter has their own primary. And it's really a process where they're removing particulates and dropping the temperature of the actual off gas down. It goes through two processes in that, and then it goes into what we call the secondary off gas. Secondary off gas is really focused on removal of all of the others, NOx, and I will say most of iodine we expect to come off in that primary off gas. So just from a big picture, but I'll talk about the backup we have if that's not the case. We expect that to come off in primary off gas. NOx, mercury, and other organics we expect to come off in secondary, whether that's through our granulated activated carbon, where mercury will be captured, or NOx being treated in our thermocatalytic oxidizer. But in general, that's where that process does before it exits the stack, compliant with the permits for both the rheological and non-rheological air permits provided by Department of Health and Ecology. So that's kind of the big picture, but that system will go through, I'll reiterate, go through an environmental performance demonstration test, what we call an EPD test, that spikes through chemical simulant, spikes that system above and beyond what we ever expect to see from a waste feed to ensure we're compliant with requirements. So that's the critical test for our off-gas system from a big picture standpoint. And that'll be after we go through cold management or cold commissioning management assessment, cold simulant runs, and then into that test.
You talk then maybe just a little bit how the lab facility is set up to do all your analysis.
So Rob, let's check. Do we need to check in with Department of Health? I mean, because they're here.
Yeah.
And we're glad they're here.
Well, that's okay. No problem. So thank you for the good comments on working, because my job is environmental monitoring. So where you're talking about, are they going to get the iodine? We have it's a white barricade. We have an air filter that has a activated charcoal cartridge we take out every week. It's there right now, primarily because of everything. Also, what it's allowed us to do is over the course of years, is develop an iodine baseline for that specific site, pre-waste treatment plant operation. We're working with the Department of Energy's Hanford Environmental Monitoring contractor to locate another air sampler downwind from the site so that we can pick up and have a comparison, pick up an operational downwind sample. We have an upwind baseline sample. From what I understand, and I don't work in the radioactive emissions section anymore, is that process of permitting is going very well. There have been challenges, not like Tom was talking about. This is an extremely complex system. They're doing stuff that ain't never been done before, and we're having to develop filtration systems to deal with things that haven't been done before. And from what I understand, that ultimately is working out very well. I can ask John Martell, our section manager, to come to the next tank waste committee meeting and provide a more focused update if you'd like.
I'll work with Ruth and
Okay.
We normally schedule through the business plan.
Sure. No problem.
And we can make room for that.
That'd be
I
great.
think it's a very important message that we
I'll be happy to coordinate that because, like I said, my guys are we're outside the procurement. So as you all know with environmental monitoring, that's kind of fun. I'll be happy to get John here, and our Gail Laws is the permitting expert for the waste treatment. Maybe she'll be able to make it too. But I know John would love to come and give you an update on that.
And we've been working very closely with both John and Gail. And Crystal.
So for those of you who are new, Washington Department of Health it's not part of the TPA, the Tri-County Agreement, but they are an ex officio member of the board. So, and they show up and pay attention. So we're glad they're here.
So my question is that also the wells sampling as well through your department?
We also do water sampling. We split sample with, at this moment, what is it? It's HMIS, Information Integration. People don't change the company name, does, and the acronyms do, it seems like. So, but yeah, we do, we split water with the Department of Energy, as well as also, whatever CRC is called nowadays. So we're doing that annually at specific wells and seeps. We have the working relationship where if we want to specifically target something we haven't sampled at before, we can really easily coordinate that. So again, that includes soil, vegetation. It's been a while since we've gotten an elk because I guess no one's ran over an elk on site. Department of Health, being the nature that it is, really doesn't want to issue us a hunting permit and a rifle to go out and get one ourselves. So, but there's plenty of us who'd love to do that, haven't we? Just for the science's sake, right?
So at one time we had a presentation talking about some of the groundwater wells being and the data. And the short map was presented of their locations, and you had some on the other side of the river. We do have some at the point of Yakima, and maybe you could describe the geography that you're covering.
Well,
Just a little more so they can see on mine. Sorry.
That's all right. You know, normally I hide in the back for a reason. It's because once I get talking, you want me to shut up. So from the environmental standpoint, our wells that we sample have been targeted based on Cold War, for lack of a better term, operations or facilities that had reported issues. So again, we're monitoring those wells that are down gradient from those facilities so that we could try to get our heads up. We do have wells in Franklin County that we monitor simply because those provide us a baseline, and they're also like a sentinel, a picket line, so that if something does start to creep into the system, we can identify it early enough to hopefully take some, help work with some kind of mitigation. We have wells up gradient on the near the Yakima. We also take well samples and irrigation samples from the area surrounding Perma-Fix. US Ecology also provides us with information. US Ecology is the on-site waste storage facility. Provides us with information from their groundwater sampling. Again, the idea is so that we can maintain surveillance of the area on site and around the site. Now, we're talking, I started out in emergency preparedness, so I got used to whole numbers, right? So like 1 rem, oh my God, that's a big number, right? And then I went into air, where we're talking 10 millirem is the allowable maximum, right? And now that I'm in environmental, I'm dealing with picocuries and micro-R, so again, I go from one number all the way down to something that's point, and then you have 11 zeros and then a number, right? Plus or minus. So, but again, it's all designed, whether it's dosimetry, whether it's soils, whether it's plants, air, so that we know and can validate that the environmental monitoring plan and system that's designed by the Department of Energy provides for public health and safety. So again, we're not one-to-one with them, but we're a quality assurance aspect where you have 100 air samplers, we typically will have 10 scattered throughout that system. Actually, we have like 25. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Now, where can people reach those results and those reports?
Yes, you can. Part of what we do every year is our main goal for my team, which is I call my guys the field mice, because we do my team does all the environmental sampling, primarily at Antwerp, but statewide. The other section of our group is, I call them the lab rats, because they do all the laboratory analyses and they produce our annual report, which you can find, and I'll email Ruth with the link to that. You can look back, and they go back to easily recoverable, I believe, 1995.
So I'm going to put Tom back on the hot seat.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to make sure that information gets shared with
Yeah, if you can get us that link today, we can put it in tomorrow's weekly update.
So Tom, what's your next challenge?
I don't know, there's a significant, I don't know, I have a next challenge. I think anytime you go through a first of a kind evolution, it's the active management of it and making sure that the team can react. And that's what I think this came out of this last challenge most effectively is the speed of reaction. So I think, I don't know that I can say, hey, this is my next one. Clearly the next milestone is getting the melter hot. I think now that we've got all these pieces and parts and we've gone through the extended condition, I think that'll progress. And then it's a matter of introducing the non-radio or non-radioactive, non-chemical producing simulant. We will find something in that, but I don't know that it's going to be major in any way, shape, or form. And then we're going to work our way through that. But the key is we react according to what we see and how we do it. And the faster we can react, which is really getting into an operational phase. Remember, we haven't been, I mean, everybody in this room knows this. 1989 was the last time we were truly a production operations facility. We're going back to that. So we got to change the normal from what has been our current pace, which is, even when we're 24/7, we're not production ops. Going back to that speed of reaction. And that's what I think we're growing the most in these evolutions that we've went through this year. I think we're growing, and I think that's going to only continue as we go forward and ultimately put us in a place that once we go operational, we can stay operational. And if something comes up, we can respond at the appropriate time. Are we there? No. Are we going to continue to learn? Yes. But I think that's where we're getting the most benefit. And again, I would speculate if I was to tell you what the next one is. I don't know. Is there going to be another one? The likelihood is yes, but what it is, I don't know.
What about the contract transition?
I don't actually see that as a major one personally. We will go through that process. We go through all of them relatively smoothly. I think we've all been through many. And the reality is this is a system of systems. And as somebody said, the people tend to stay. It's really management and name that changes out. So as long as we keep the people that are doing the actual work, which in most cases that is true, I don't know that we'll see a big impact. And with DF Law being the top priority on the Hanford site, I suspect whoever comes in will have that as a top priority. I won't suspect. I know whoever comes in will have that as a top priority. So they will be focused on ensuring no impact to that system.
Tom, do we have a time frame when that transition is?
I have no clue. I'm not part of it at all in any way, shape, or form, and I am not going to speculate as to timing. We're never been closer, I guess is the way to put it. I don't have any data. Truly don't have any information on that.
Any more questions? Discussion, comments, more information? The last note that I did have is I wanted you to mention that the hard work that people have been doing in training in the laboratory and the local college and their contribution to that. And is that work complete now and you're fully functional and confident to do every analysis you can do, or are you still working in advance?
So our laboratory processes have advanced significantly. We were able to use the lab just outside of CBC to take our analytical equipment down there in the beginning to create our methods. We've transitioned all that equipment back into the facility where the lab technicians and chemists are finishing their qualifications, and they're fully aligned. But I will say that the support, again, both locally and in the community, both from a local standpoint and the workforce I have right now, and also the support we're getting for future workforce continues to be fantastic for the Hanford communities. So can't thank them enough in the processes and partnerships we've created over that time.
And your staffing level in the lab? Can you give me a rough number? Hundreds?
I don't know the total number in the lab, but what I can say is we are staffed for qualification and staffed for operating the plant. I know I have total about 2,200 people in total on site from a WTP standpoint. About 1,800 of those are directly related to DF Law. So, I mean, those are just rough numbers at macro level. I don't know the individual facilities at that level.
So, in the past that we've always let tours get on a bus and get out to the site. Granted that now you're closing down for your security areas, et cetera. Is there going to be a visitor center that we can see in the future when we go around the site on the bus?
I don't know the answer to that one either. I'm so focused on WTP. Tours are not on my mind other than the ones that they show up at my facility, I give them.
I'm glad of that.
So, but if somebody else, I don't know.
Yeah, I can interject on that. We have the virtual tour.
Right.
That is online. It's available 24/7. And you'll see things on that virtual tour that you can't see now because they were taken before some of these areas became more operational. So that's available right now.
Okay, and we have that.
I mean, it's on Hanford.gov.
Where else?
It's on Hanford.gov.
Into the virtual tour
And then before I can add it again.
and add a section in the weekly update that's sort of agency announcements.
Yeah.
To, what I'm hoping is to reduce the email load that we're inflicting on you, consolidate that in one place.
Yeah, if you go to Hanford.gov and search for outreach, so much stuff is channeled through that microsite that getting to the virtual tour is easy at that point. So there's a link on there. So get in there and have fun. It's meant for people to explore.
Did I see one?
All right, one last question for me. Once you start hot ops, what kind of a ramp-up curve do you envision before you reach your nominal output capacity of 21 metric tons of glass per day?
So
1 month, 5 months, year, 2 weeks?
So the original consent decree anticipated a 3-year ramp up when it was all together. We don't know that it'll be quite that long, but we anticipate a multi-year ramp up rate to get to a total. Now we'll do a sprint run to show that the plant is able to do that during our processes of cold commissioning. So we'll show that we can meet the 21 metric tons from a capacity standpoint. But from a true process operation standpoint, we expect that to be a multi-year process to get to full production capacity.
And that full production be 21 metric tons per day.
Average of, well, remember the main nameplate on the facility is 30. And the reason it's 21 is we assume a 30% downtime. So you essentially you're operating at nameplate with maintenance time of roughly 30%.
I just wanted to throw a pitch out there. There's some good conversation with Department of Health. We're actually planning one of our next Let's Talk About Hanford events with Department of Health on March 29th. So in addition to possibly having them at a future tank waste meeting, if any of you are interested in learning more about what health does at Hanford at a high level, that's a good opportunity to come and ask your questions to Department of Health and see what they do in conjunction, with us and with Energy and EPA on hand position.
Good idea.
Yeah, and we're going to have a formal announcement on that event towards the end of February. So it's not formal announcement yet, but we're planning March 29th.
We'll keep that on the calendar so you get that in the weekly update too.
And also mention you share with Rob.
Yes.
Link to the virtual tour for those online is in the chat. Can't wait.
Still my class.
I've got, that's Josh, that's not. We got 26 people online. Are there folks online who have a final question, comment?
Well, at that, Tom, thank you very much. I can't wait to hear your next report.
My pleasure. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, and this went very fast.
We're only 35 minutes ahead of schedule.
Yeah, it went very fast.
My way.
Yeah.
Take it and run.
Bunch of time.
If there's anything, of course, team will be here and they can relay those questions. Thank you.
A question to Rob and Mike. The break was scheduled at 10:30. That's literally 35 minutes from now.
Yeah.
What do you want to do?
Well, some of the things I wanted to talk about, and maybe I was just going to say it in the end, but this last couple of weeks have been pretty exciting around regards to high-level waste and low-level waste. And I wanted to point out that if anybody, a lot of people attended either online or whatever to the NAS meetings, and it was very illustrative.
the documents they've issued now, pretty much have, well, I don't know how much detail to go into.
Okay, so Rob,
yeah.
let me ask a process question before we jump in. One of the FACA requirements is that the DDFO approves all our agendas. So Mike, is it okay if we move up the reflections on NAS meetings from committee business to this half hour?
I have no problem with you moving items up in your agenda, Rob. I do not think it's appropriate to add agenda items, so I'd ask that we stick to the approved agenda.
Okay, so let's move basically the second line of committee business up to this half hour and then take a break at 10:30.
Okay, but let me clarify that. How restrictive are we talking about agenda items?
We have an approved agenda. If the item within your agenda is within the envelope of discussion of a given item, I have no issue with that. But if your intent is to add additional items, then I would respect the decline. I'm not going to approve an agenda on the fly.
I just,
So on our agenda, I put reflections on National Academy of Sciences meetings, January 31st and February 1st. So that's the piece to move up because it's here and we have the time. But that's why I asked both of you, because I don't want to be back up, BACA uncompliant.
Rob, I'm sensing consternation. So how about during the break or afterwards, you and Mike can kind of just have an offline discussion of.
but I just wonder that we would carry on a conversation and then somehow we. I don't know. I just think free talk should be good. And if we have a moment to have a discussion point, somebody wants to bring up something that's tertiary to that, I have no problem listening to it.
Rob, so I wasn't able to attend, and I know some people were, but I would really appreciate an overview of your observations and others' observations of the NAS meeting, right? And because it's important to us, so that would be my request.
Okay.
And that's why I slotted it in under committee business so that there was that opportunity.
So and let me just take the moment and I'll talk about the NES meeting. Again, we understand that the FFRDC is a federally funded research. It's directed to the Department of Energy or to the National Academy of Sciences, and using the laboratory at Savannah River and base to head up the team of people that evaluated certain things. And so they came up with a framework of the three processes that they would deal with for, again, let me explain to separate. The FRDC and the NES has to do with low activity waste that has been processed. And part of the reason it's really high and very important because what we do with that low level waste could backstop the entire process to get the high level waste out. So they essentially Savannah River looked at a number of points. I have a copy of the handout that they gave, the PowerPoints. I'm not going to go with it, but just to summarize, and I will loan it to anybody if you want to go through in more detail. But we had presentations on various subjects. But we had subjects on basically all the process feed vectors, alternative descriptions, decision framework, risk and cost, drought technology, fluidized bed, a little discussion on the site disposal and transportation, some on the site disposal description, a little bit on the summary of alternatives, and then an assessment and wrap up. So it was a very detailed 2 days of presentations from folks that were either consultants or actual full-time employees at the Savannah River Laboratory. they evaluated, on 6 items and, 2 of the items, 1 through 4, just can't find my notes. I wasn't prepared this second. Get back there. So they evaluated all the alternatives on the long-term effectiveness, on the long-term risks of successful completion, the implementation schedule and risk, the likelihood of successful mission completion, and life cycle costs. 2 additional ones that they had were the ones that they did not discuss, did not choose. I'm sorry. But 2 areas where they didn't. One was in regulatory. They could not make comments on regulatory rules, could not make comments on public opinion. And I believe in the 6th bullet that they had, the comment from public opinion, I think is something where the board can play a part in this action. So I will bring that to the EIC meeting next later on. We really need to see how we can provide the 6th bullet to the FRDC, or can we help provide that? The basic conclusions from the report, there were 10 conclusions, and 1 recommendation, and a number of subjects to talk about. A lot of those the subjects talked about dealt with our public opinion issues. But again, the options were to they decided they had started out with 23 different options and narrowed them down to 15. They narrowed it further down to 4. And the 4 is what they did the extensive review on. The first number 1 in of the options was the vitrification of everything, always. And of course, the next one was a grout. Another one was the steam reforming. And the third one was a combination of a 2-phase project where you start with grout being made and shipped offsite for up until 2039, and then somehow transitioning into another site for that disposal, possibly on-site disposal of the grouted waste. They also talk about SLA is not just even though the low-level waste liquids are one of the biggest problems that they have, they also have issues with the grout that is used for encapsulation. So, for example, you have carbon filters. You would crush those carbon filters with radioactive iodine on them, and crush them up into small boxes, and then cast that into grout and then dispose of it at the low-level waste site. That's kind of what the commercial nuclear industry does. That's kind of what the other experiences we've had nationally and internationally deal with the iodine. But altogether, the subject was open. There was a lot of discussion. There was a number of questions. One of the most surprising things that I learned was that if we don't come up with an SLA solution until we don't come with a solution for the SLA, then we're going to hamper the processing of the high-level waste.
It's SLA.
Secondary low activity waste. So in other words, the drippings that come off, the condensation that comes off the evaporators, the reprocess or process from the caustic scrubbers and down into it. The things that they have to discharge from the plant has to be considered contaminated. And that's how they process. The biggest surprise I saw was the fact that some of their timetables is not even start processing, start with the grouting or the 2-phase process until 2050. And some other ones are, they maybe start by 2039 and get a jump on. But again, if they don't handle this volume of liquids, because it's such a large portion of all the radioactive waste we have out there, it will hamper retrievals and making of high-level waste products. And in the end, they were looking at, but anyway, they looked at a number of options. The grout, or a superior grout, the grout that can last for its length of time it needs to last, as long as those species are radioactive, is something that they support. And that it seems to be a good option for low-level waste. And there was some discussion in a hallway about the international, what are they doing everywhere else? You know, there's waste everywhere. And it seems to be these high technical grade routes are stored, and waste are stored in vaults in a lot of cases in the mountains, and they feel very comfortable. Anybody else got any recollections from the meeting they want to talk about?
I've got some folks in queue.
Please.
I know Ecology had some folks attend, so I want to check in with Dan McDonald, and then I've got Dan Solitz in queue. Dan McDonald, do you have some observations from last week's meeting?
You've got Suzanne too.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Dan go.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, Ruth. Yeah, it was quite a comprehensive meeting, that's for sure. Some takeaways that I had, and then Suzanne will follow me. A bit on history. This was the second round for the FFRDC, Federally Funded Research and Development Center. They are essentially directed by Congress to go do their magic, and the NAS is directed to review what the FFRDC does. So in looking at all the reports, there were some similarities from previous reports and in this one. However, as Rob said, this was different in that they actually made a recommendation. And their recommendation essentially said that DOE needs to go forth and very quickly and very robustly put together various places by which they can see whether grout will work for them. All of that said, a couple of cautions. When you look at the report, it's very clear that the FFRDC notes that there is not a base formulation yet developed for the particular kind of waste that we have here. And that does make some sense. Hanford has a very diverse set of waste. It's very complex to put together a formula that will work. And the research that Ecology has done over the last 2 or 3 years has not found, if you will, a production level grout formula that's ready to go to production for the kind of waste that we're dealing with. So there's more work to be done there. And I heard what Rob said about high level waste. I understand at this particular point, and this was interesting as well, FFRDC suggested that grout would be the only mechanism by which we could begin to process low activity waste without any detriment to the high level waste process and project going forward. So that was interesting as well. As Rob said, there's a variety of technical things that we heard. There's a variety of project things we heard. Another caution for the board, I didn't hear Rob mention it, so I will. The cost profiles that are built inside the FFRDC report and the NAS review are at best what are called class 5 estimates. For those of you who don't know, DOE does their costing in terms of classes. Class 1 is the most precise and the closest to being accurate. Class 5 is generally plus 100% minus somewhere between 20 and 50. At best, these are class 5 estimates. And the other part of this is that they're parametric. For those of you who don't know that, parametric are estimates where they take a look at a Ford and say, okay, a Chevy ought to cost about the same because it's the same color, has 4 wheels, and it also has an engine. But it does not get down into sufficient enough detail to prove that those cost estimates are accurate. So going forward, as we come up with better technologies, as we come up with better resources, as we come up with better costs, there could likely be changes not only to cost, but to scope and schedule. So that remains to be seen. And Rob is right on target when he talks about the variety of combinations, grout 4B and grout 6. are the two primary grout formulations, one of which that are being done on site and one of which are being done off-site. That transition is part of what's going on. And it remains to be seen exactly what's going to occur. So at this particular point, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne. She actually gave a presentation there, and she has some commentary relative to that. Suzanne?
Suzanne, can you maybe come up closer to the table because we've had some mic issues?
So I'm Suzanne Dahl, I'm the tank waste treatment section manager for the Department of Ecology. And we've been reviewing the FFRDC report. Dan did a really great job and Rob did a really great job of summarizing sort of the history. So what SLAW is it's supplemental low activity treatment. So, and you might say, okay, well, we're building a DEF law. Why do we need a SLAW? You know, besides the fact that it rhymes, but so we've always known that direct feed law, the law plant, is only a part of the treatment capacity needed for the whole low activity waste. And we knew that there would need to be a second plant of whatever kind. And so the FFRDC was charged by Congress to go look at what that might be. And there's a question of when you need it. And the FFRDC, and Rob, you pointed it out really well, the FFRDC points out that you need that supplemental law treatment along with the direct feed law running. This assumes that they're both running together at some point. You need that. The FFRDC says you need it when the high level plant is running. And that's a little different than some of the stuff that we're seeing elsewhere for example, in the alternatives of analysis and other discussions. For sure, when you need it is when the pretreatment plant starts, because that's when you're washing all the sludges and taking the chemicals out of the sludges. But the FFRDC made a really good point, and we tend to call it something different. We call it alternative treatment. They call the whole thing supplemental treatment. We call things that you start treating early and maybe sending off site. We call that alternative treatment. It's just a nomenclature. It doesn't probably matter, but it's the way people's brains are wired. And then we think of supplemental law treatment as being after you've got the whole suite of plants up and going and you need that extra treatment capacity for the low activity side. But a really interesting point that the FFRDC made really well in this last meeting was that whatever you call it, the sooner you start treating that additional low activity waste and running direct feed law, that's a given. But as soon as you start treating that low activity waste and take it off site, because that was their recommendation, start treating low activity and take it off site. The sooner you do that, the better it drives the whole risk down for the mission, risk to project completion, risk to money, risk to the environment. And they had two really interesting alternatives. One was 4B, which basically started treating it early and kept treating it and took it all off-site for disposal. And then alternative 6, which started treating it off-site and taking it all off-site for disposal, and then eventually evolved to leaving some of it on site for disposal. But the important thing between both of those is you ended up taking a huge amount of the inventory off-site. And I found it really interesting and, to my perspective, truthful, that the FFRDC noted that our Hanford geology, and you guys all know this, that, you know, it's a gravel vadosone on top of a gravel aquifer that flows right to the Columbia River on top of a portable water, you know, potable water aquifer, you know, something that's usable, is very different than off-site facilities than, say, Clive or the facility in Texas, where they either are not on top of a potable aquifer or they have 900 feet of clay. And so what the FFRDC made the point is that the long-term effectiveness of grout, as the current grout knowledge is, may not be protective enough to dispose of all of our inventory in a landfill at Hanford. So their recommendation is start now because it makes a difference. Take it off site and maybe take all of it off site or take at least the worst amount of the inventory off site. That's like kind of the first time that whole story has come together in my brain that way.
Right, Chris, I've got something too as well. Dan Solwitz and then Chris.
Thank you. That was probably the best of the meetings the NASCAM has held on this since 2017, and I really would recommend the videos, particularly the second day. And they go to a great pains to explain the process in a very understandable way, and it's really worthwhile doing that. And Susan and Dan have already spent some time on that, so I'd like to spend a little bit of time on the public acceptance aspect. Of taking liquid off site. The previous day to those two meetings, I listened to the public input on the DOE's EIS on downblending and shifting surplus weapons plutonium across the country back and forth. And there was a great, huge outcry in the public just between shipping powdered plutonium versus solid plutonium. And there probably will be an EIS for shipping liquids off-site for treatment. I guess one thing that would be useful to emphasize, or at least dig into and find out if it's true, is that the liquid radioactive waste we are currently shipping on our highways, the norms, the fracking water, is how does our low-level liquid waste that we may be shipping off-site compared to that? And I think there's if we're going to get this done, it's going to have to be with public acceptance, and I think we need to start thinking about and working on and trying to figure out how to do that. Just one other little side note: they did do a slideshow of the evaporator, and the visuals in that were really good, and I hope we can incorporate those into our own virtual tour. Thank you.
I've got Chris in the room and Tom Galeotto online. Chris?
When you use, and this is both you and Rob, when you use the term offsite, are you talking about routing it offsite, disposing it offsite, or both, depending on what the alternative is?
It's yes, and the important part is the disposal offsite from an environmental protection, but the FFRDC pointed out that actually treating it offsite, at least initially, might be a quicker way to get started.
Okay, now as far as disposing it offsite, what are they going to dispose it in? Because presumably you're going to put it in some kind of stainless steel canister that meets DOT regulations. And I'm hard pressed to see how, if you grout something, put it in 1-inch thick stainless steel container, that you're going to have environmental impacts down the road. Because at Fernald, that's what we did. We grouted up our waste. We sent 3,776 stainless steel containers to Andrews, Texas. And they were thick. And there was no way on earth that the grout was going to get out of those containers. There's no rain in Andrews, Texas, so they're not going to rust.
Suzanne, let me take this one on if I can. What I would offer is this: depending on the disposal site that's chosen, and that's not yet been done, there are what are called waste acceptance criteria that have to be met by both the provider and the receiver of goods and services. In this case, the waste in whatever canisters or cans or whatever there happens to be. I'm not suggesting it's a can or a box or what, because that is yet to be decided. It also depends on whether or not it's going to be liquid in process at the receiving site or whether it's going to be a solid by the time it gets there. None of those decisions are far enough along to have been made at this particular point. They're still in process.
That's interesting because we had a detailed process control plan, and the critical elements of it were meeting waste acceptance criteria at Andrews, Texas. And that included things like waste had to be solid, no free liquids in it, had to meet toxicity characteristic leaching parameters for lead and one other, I think, chromium. So that was all built into, to our process control plan.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all. What I'm offering at this particular point, that there is not, to my knowledge, been a formal choice made as to the receiving facility for this particular waste. And until that's done, the waste acceptance criteria are still in limbo.
We point out, they did mention there are two facilities, waste control specialists down in Texas, I believe. And it's using the same salt that we're putting the underground has got this huge vein of salt, miles salt. And on one end is we got the whip, and the other end we're gonna have, that's with waste control specialists. Very safe.
So,
The second one is Clyde, Utah. Okay, and that's the shorter. There was also discussions about transportation, trying to ship by rail millions of gallons of liquid waste. Has got questions with it, et cetera. But I think the most important thing to further your point is that if the earlier we do this, we lower the risk reduction to the site by orders of magnitude. Okay, and then by the time we make the decision in 2039, 2040, that we're gonna leave some waste here on site, or if we can, then the whole risk profile is different than it is right now. And that their encouragement, I mean, it was almost, they just basically said, the sooner you start, the better off you're gonna be. And you get moving. And their one recommendation is get moving with, make the decision.
so I've got a couple people in queue. Just like grew up not far from Amherst, and it does rain. There are 17 inches of rain a year, and you should be there the 3 days it shows up.
According to the rod we had, it only rains 5 inches a year.
When I was living there, it was close to the fire,
West Texas
and it
is
all
just
came at once in a
different.
flash flood.
I've got Tom Galluno online and Pam here in the room. Tom?
Thanks, Ruth. I did not attend the NAS meetings, and I'm getting a little confused about the process and the path that we're on. So I wanted to try to ask for some clarification of that. My understanding is the FFRDC did the study that the NAS was reviewing in these last few meeting sessions with the NAS. And I guess my question is, where does it go from here? DOE has a number of things going on. The test bed initiative is one that's near and dear to our heart. The overall question of grout versus glass for low activity waste is a key decision in terms of reclassification of waste decision from DOE. So I would be very interested from DOE's perspective to get a conceptual timeline of where we are today in terms of treating low activity waste with glass versus grout, and what has to be done and when those decisions are expected to come to the front of attention, so that we understand where we're headed. From these studies and this discussion, it sounds like grout is the recommended way to go for low activity waste. But there are so many decisions from DOE's perspective to get there. I don't know when that happens. So can we get a conceptual type time frame, a timeline that would define those steps and those points leading to a decision on grouting low activity waste?
Suzanne, do you want to?
Well, so just one clarification, it's a solution, grout and in ecology's perspective, taking it off-site for disposal is a solution for the supplemental low activity. It's not all low activity. The other portion of the low activity is going to continue to be vitrified because gosh, we're building the plant and it's already operational, or almost operational. The second part is as far as the schedule and understanding that, I realize the question was asked to the Department of Energy. Department of Energy and Department of Ecology are currently in holistic negotiations, and we have a confidentiality agreement between us while we're negotiating. So I would answer that sort of probably neither of us can provide that. But the good news is you could look at the most recent alternatives of analysis that was published by the Department of Energy, and you could see some potential timelines of different things. And that's about as good as probably ecology thinks as you can see. DOE might have a different answer, but.
This is Dan. Let me follow up just a little bit on it. I think it's important for the board to understand that the AOA and the FFRDC NAS work, those are not decision documents. Those are technical documents designed to inform the decision makers who will make a decision downstream. But in and of themselves, neither the AOA or the FFRDC NAS work are decision documents.
So I've got Pam and Ryan in queue, and we're looking at a break in like 3 minutes. So first, Pam.
Okay, so secondary versus supplemental. You guys have talked about it roundabout. So to me, secondary is waste that gets generated in the process of the vitrification plant. Supplemental is, in addition to what we've got, what are we going to do with the rest of the waste? Because we need more treatment, right?
Yep.
Okay. So just to clarify that. So one question, I've attended the previous National Academy of Science meetings, which have been extraordinarily frustrating. They keep being asked to look at steam reforming, steam reforming off the table, the Idaho technology. Are they still thinking that we should be looking at that?
It certainly seemed to sit in that meeting and in their slide presentations that it's okay.
It's off the table.
Well, it's not
Finally.
officially off the table, but they should point out both cost and schedule for the risk categories that they had out evaluated. It ranks some of the lowest.
They still haven't gotten it.
23, they narrowed to 15, they narrowed to 5. So it was looked at, but it said, no, this is not.
Because there's members of Congress that have advocacy focuses. Okay, so this has been discussed in the past, particularly the opportunity to go to Texas. Somebody's got to ask ecology officially, will you let us do that? Is that being discussed in the secret conversations, or does that need to be initiated?
Brian?
I'm not sure the agencies can actually ask given the confidentiality agreement.
But the situation is, it's not going to happen unless ecology gets a request for it to happen. And ecology's got to say it's okay if we're going to either go out here and ship to Texas. I'd be really surprised if they said we can ship liquid waste any place. Or if it's treated in Richland, they can treat it in Anchorage. But shipping liquid waste, that's a lot of states between here and there. So it's got to be initiated. And that's something the HAB can say, is initiate the conversation and let's get on with it. So.
And were you at the HAB meeting a couple weeks ago during David's presentation? David had some comments that spoke specifically to grouting and TBI, and that recording is available online. Josh has it if you want to listen to those comments again. He talked a little bit about TBI and where college is at with it and grouting in general.
So we've had a test bed initiative application originally to us.
Right.
And we've seen a draft of one since then as well. So.
Okay. Good.
He did not say no. That's what
I think one of Bowen's, there was a letter that he wrote where he discussed some of the issues involved in that. And some of it is the issues of legalese, the terminology, what is what. And that all has, and what's going to be weird, what's going to, waste incidental to processing, okay, or reprocessing. So it seemed like there was evidence, but now that you come back and you say, well, we're in holistic negotiations. Well, we've heard that now for, I don't know, many months. And so when do we expect product? Does anybody know? Who runs the holistic But like, who's the guy that sits at the table? And do they have a calendar when we should expect some feedback?
Brian, I'm going to give you the last word.
We can't, I can't speak, I'm not part of those. Again, that's at the management level, like we're talking Brian Vance, Laura Watson, probably the regional administrator for EPA. I'm not sure who at EPA. And then they've got the federal mediator, Justice Department or something that's helping mediate the conversation. That's all I know. And there hasn't been a commitment on a finalized date yet, because, you know, if you go and stick an end date on it, they're going to probably blow past it. So.
Yeah. Well, I won't, I mean, we're going to close here, but my only point is that we respect the negotiations, we respect the privacy, respect the confidentiality in that. But we would like a little bit more information that could be given to us, such as, are we going to go for another 3 years with holistic, or do we expect, you know, I personally think that we've been in holistic negotiations for a long time.
It's been a while.
And that we should somehow learn that it's gonna end.
Yeah, and David shared, I think he shared at the HAB meeting and some other venues that, and again, don't want to speak for David and the negotiations since I'm not part of it. My understanding is that they're getting closer to being done. And that's the vaguest timeline I can give you. And I wish I could give you more, but I can't.
Well, I just point out the summary from the GAO report in 2020 basically said lack of decision is killing us.
So Ryan, I had you last in queues.
Yeah, I was going to share, if anybody wants to see Suzanne's presentation from the NAS, I've got a copy of the slides, and I think I just got the link from the NAS folks. So if you want to see the recording, just let me know and I can send it to you separately, or I can share the link with Josh too. So
yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I mean, we can stick that link in tomorrow's thing too.
Cool.
All right. Rob, I suggest we break until 10:45. That's going to put us a little ahead of schedule, and we'll come back and talk about cleanup priorities draft advice with Chris. Do you have the advice table, Ryan, or do you have to show it?
Yeah, let me go pull it.
Okay. So, Rob, do you or Chris want to introduce the next agenda item?
Yeah, Chris has been working on this for months. And, and so this is kind of the culmination of a number of inputs on some of the highlighted priorities that we'd like to present to the site. So Chris, go ahead.
Historically, the Budget Contracts Committee has issued in the spring of the year a cleanup priorities advice document to the tri-party agencies, recommending what the HAB feels cleanup priorities should be for 2 fiscal years in advance of the issuance of the advice. So this advice is for priorities that the HAB feels are critical for 2025. And 2025 fits into the DOE budget cycle because in the spring of this year, DOE will send to Washington its recommendations for funding and work priorities. And by issuing this advice in the spring of the year, it matches, it provides additional input to DOE, the DOE headquarters, and fits in nicely to the budget cycle. At the full board meeting a couple weeks ago, I gave an overview of the format of the advice, and the structure of the advice, some similarities and differences from advice issued in the last year or so. But I'm not going to repeat that today. What I'm going to do is just show the table that appears in the advice with the actual our recommendations for priority cleanup. Now, in previous years, we've used the same categories that DOE has in their 5-year plan. So, for example, last year in the 5-year plan, DOE divided things into tank waste treatment, river corridor and plateau, And those were the categories that we used. And this year, we've used the same categories. DOE has tank waste treatment, risk reduction, infrastructure, and mission support. Those are the categories we've accepted. We've also put in 2 additional categories, one similar to last year that we call indirect and supporting activities. And we put in a category this year called accelerated cleanup activities. This is recommendations that we have to try and accelerate the overall schedule for cleanup on the site by trying to take some cleanup activities that currently are scheduled for out years and moving them forward. We understand that this takes additional funding. You can't do additional work or extra work without money. We understand that, but we're hoping that by putting this in and adding words to the text, that this might ring a bell, let's say in DOE headquarters, but at least it lets DOE headquarters and DOE knows that this is important to our HAB constituencies, that we'd really like to accelerate the overall schedule, if at all possible, with appropriations. Last year, we categorized things as critical and important. Critical being things that you absolutely have to fund with the appropriated money. Important that if the funding allows, if appropriations allows, then you need to start or complete the activity. We've done away with the important priority this year, we're just calling things critical. And the reason we have done that is twofold, actually. One is that there are a very large number of cleanup activities that are going on site that do not appear in the DOE's 5-year plan, but are important nevertheless. They're being funded with appropriations. They're being carried out. The other one is the category called risk reduction. We don't really know what the listing of cleanup activities is under risk reduction. It's based upon a list called the integrated priority list, which is based upon risk, upon funding, and upon politics. And we don't know what the activities are, what the listing is, how they rank as important, how they rank with regard to risk reduction. We just don't know that. DOE does, and presumably ecology and DOE do, or EPA does, but we don't. And so we felt it was that it was better not to try and list things as being important if we don't know where they fit on the integrated priority list or in the overall risk reduction scheme. Felt that probably best for DOE and the tri-party agencies to decide what's important if funding with not with additional funding, but with funding that isn't used for critical items, for them to decide that. The last thing, as I mentioned, the 5-year plan. This was the 5-year plan that was talked about at a board meeting in the fall. DOE releases this each year, and by each fiscal year, it gives a listing of their cleanup priorities. We use this as a basis for our 2025, and then with what's on here, we've made a call important. We don't include critical, yes, we do. And whether there are things that we feel should be added to here that maybe appear in FY 26, 27 or not at all. So this is one of our main resources. Okay, now let's look at the table. The first one under tank waste treatment is DF law. Operate DF law and optimize throughput. This, in fact, is the first item on the 5-year plan for 2025. We also say optimize throughput to reach full capacity levels of waste vitrification at 21 metric tons of glass per day. We just heard from Tom Fletcher that they have a ramp-up period of 3 years to reach 21 metric tons a day. So it's highly unlikely that that's going to happen in the first year of operations. So I think we probably need to reword that to reflect what Tom Fletcher said about a 3-year ramp up. Maybe they can beat 3 years, do it 2.5, do it 2, but I think we need to reword the first sentence there so that we're not expecting them to reach full capacity in year 1. The second one, vis-a-vis comments at the PIC meeting yesterday, we need to modify a little bit to say that we're going to implement the SST leak detection, characterization, mitigation, cleanup, and communication plan. Now, what this plan is it was recommended by the Tank Waste Committee and Advice 313 last year, and also recommended by the Budget Contracts Committee and Advice 312 last year, both saying the same thing, and that is you need to develop a plan that addresses how you're going to respond and mitigate tank leaks. And in fact, that happened. DOE and Ecology reached agreement, and that DOE would produce such a plan by August of this year, 2023. Therefore, it should be ready for implementation in out years. So we want to make sure that the word implement is on here so that we don't think we're asking them to develop. There's no confusion about that. We want them to implement presumably an already developed plan. High-level waste facility, the wording on here, continued design and construction activities necessary to accomplish the current WTP high-level waste facility operation startup. It is a TPA milestone. It's also I don't know where the word milestone came from in there, but it is also in the FY25 plan as a critical item for DOE. Under the category of risk reduction for WESA, say initiate transfer cesium and strontium capsules, the capsule storage area. That's listed, indicated by DOE as a critical cleanup activity for 2025 and the 5-year plan. It's important to continue funding to the maximum extent possible to clean up groundwater, both in the Central Plateau and along the river corridor. So this isn't in the 5-year plan. They say continue to maximize plume reduction through pump and treat optimization and source reduction activities, both on the Central Plateau and along the river corridor. DOE has done an excellent job on this to date, and we just want them to continue that, and we don't want that to get lost in the emphasis on DFLAW. Something that there was a fair bit of discussion on yesterday because there was some confusion, and I'll read it, and I think there probably want to be some discussion again today, is on off-site waste shipments. Initially, we had established an engineering assessment, risk reduction, agreed upon path forward for true waste packaging, shipping, and disposal at off-site disposal facilities. Rob wanted to reword it a little bit. And so he put on a sub-bullet B, heading B, establish a path forward to complete the test bed initiative for the grounding of supplemental low activity waste law. And I was a little confused by his wording, and I thought there was a C, demonstrate the successful offsite disposal of TSCR process low activity waste. But I think we need to re-examine that. There was some confusion on what that meant yesterday by discussion at the PIC. I haven't changed anything, so I think Rob and other folks in the tank waste committee, I think we need some rewording on that. So maybe we can talk about it here, or you could canvass some of the folks in the committee and just send me the rewording. What would you like to do?
Well, I think that number B was basically added because that became a recommendation out of the FRDC. C was simply the logic that would then demonstrate we can ship offsite. So the idea that C is a separate entity was not
intended to I think you can remove all of C. Okay, and basically put the two items as one is we're going to ship off-site true waste and potentially ship off-site low-level waste or slop. And what we're asking for is simply start proposing a path that we can talk about, okay, and poke fun at, and to make it better. And so the idea is, that I think the test bed initiative is very important. It not only is a small scale, but it also gives us so much information right now we don't know. We can't prove to people what is going to be in that. We can't prove to them that this can be done. So let's just put a path forward when we can start to see action.
Could we have that as a separate entity in the table?
Well, I just lumped it.
Or dash E.
I just lumped it under off-site shipment. Well, because both of them represent something going off-site. Yeah, and we've got Mia here as she points out, please.
So I just want to reiterate what I said yesterday. Hanford Challenge does not support endorsing grout or TBI or any of that in the advice. We do support more information. So something like communicate the plan for the testbed initiative. Along those lines, we would be on board with advice for that, but we will not support advice that endorses the testbed initiative or grout in general.
And just to boil it down further there,
Yeah.
I understand the point, and let me reiterate it, is that why we in Washington would think that it's acceptable to take our waste and give it to another state. It's just, it's responsibility. And that's why I believe, in our discussion that you support vitrification of all of it.
Mia, repeat what you said. Communicate the plan to give me because you did mention testbed initiative in there, but say the words again that you said a few minutes ago.
It's something about communicate the plan on the testbed initiative. I can send you.
To complete the testbed initiative?
No,
or just
to
on the plan?
complete, no. The plan, what is the plan? Communicate the plan.
For testbed.
For the testbed initiative. And I can send you.
Is that acceptable to you?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I think that because we know so little about it, give us more information.
Okay, I've got folks in queue. John Price, you want to jump in?
I'm back on true waste, so why don't you finish the test bed?
Okay, John on crew. I've got Dan Solitz and Jan. Dan, are you on TBI and taking waste off site? Dan Solitz?
Yes, I am. The bottom one there, the TISCR demonstrate the successful offsite disposal of TISCR process of low activity waste. There's one question I have is that TISCR, that elutable resin, that's what I'm assuming they're talking about. We're talking about is elutable resin stored in those canisters. Is that going to become under the WIR? I mean, that's the only way it could stay on site if they pass the WIR. I want to say something about that. If the offsite disposal of TISCR, I don't think there's a place for that anywhere in the United States unless you go deep geologic disposal. Is there?
Yes. Help us with that, Pam.
It's Texas. It's Andrews, Texas. The state has already, the state of Texas, their environmental office has already said that if it's low level waste, it can come away.
So I've got, Dan, are you on this one? No, okay. Tom Galeotto, are you on this one?
Well, no, my comments were on a couple different ones for what Chris said, so if you're not ready
Okay.
for that.
All right, so let's
I
do,
have a question on this one.
okay, you've got a question on this one and then I'll go back to the queue.
You said eliminate C. And Dan was just asking about C. So C, I just want to make sure C is gone. No Tisker.
Right, and B should essentially read communicate a plan for the for the test bed initiatives, yeah.
But we say develop and communicate plan for the test bed initiative. Is that acceptable?
You're on this one, Steve?
Yeah, I guess, can you kind of share a little bit what the conversation with Rob was about why you're
Yeah.
because shipping out of state is a big concern?
It's multiple things. So it's specifically for the testbed initiative, treating waste at Permafix Northwest. We have a lot of concerns about that facility. And then for shipping off-site, we do not believe that grout is more effective in containing the waste or cheaper. And so shipping off-site and leaving it in a shallow land burial in either Andrews or Utah would leave waste that we know is going to leach out iodine and technetium later, many generations later, and that people in those places could access the waste and be harmed by the waste into the future. And so we are also concerned that, like my train of thought, that one of those places that one or both of those places may not be able to receive the waste. There may be activism, or I've heard also of a lawsuit from oil companies that don't want a waste leaching out into the oil fields below these sites. And so that they may be shut down for people for grouted waste to go to these sites. And so then where would that waste go? It would come back to Hanford, where we know it's not a good place to store grouted waste. And so we feel that vitrification is the best option. It's the most safe and effective, and it's not kicking the can down the road for future generations to deal with the consequences later.
So we're requesting a plan that addresses all of those issues, be something that or
We'd like it more information in terms of just the history of grout at Hanford, the testing in the 1990s, what's changed since then that makes us all believe that it's going to be better this time around. So we're definitely open to more information on the topic.
I've got 3 people in queue. John, jump in.
Back on Rob's question. So you asked about whether it was eludable resins. So we have an existing TPA milestone for DOE to evaluate disposition pathways for the resin columns. So they owe us the first evaluation in 2026 and every 5 years thereafter. If you want to look at the milestone, it's M-62-60. So it's going to look at options like offsite disposal, as well as potentially going through the waste treatment plant and being vitrified.
And the milestone again?
M-62-60.
I'm scrambling to write it down. Right. I've got 3 people. I've got Jan.
That's the columns with the resin in it. Yes,
with cesium and starch in it.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've got Jan, I've got John Price on transuranic waste, and Tom Galiotto. So thank you for your patience. Jan.
Thanks. So my comment is on the West SIF table there, RRA. It says initiate transfer of cesium and strontium capsules to the capsule storage area. I would recommend changing the second capsule to dry storage area. When we went on the bus tour here recently, we got to see the constructed slab that it's going to be sitting on. So I think that, the strontium and cesium capsules are being taken out of, wet storage and moved into dry storage in appropriate overpack. So I would suggest that we change the second word capsule to dry.
dry capsule
To
storage.
dry storage area.
I just took it word for word off of what was in the 5-year plan here.
Yeah. Right, John Price on transuranic.
Yeah, so as far as there, establish a path forward for transuranic waste. I feel like we have existing tri-party agreement milestones in the M-91 series for that. So just to give you a few snippets, so nominally DOE will start shipping transuranic waste from Hanford in 2028. They've told us they expect they can do that earlier. They would finish shipping small containers by 2040 and finish shipping large containers by 2045. So I believe we have the framework already for shipping transuranic waste offsite and disposing of it. And caveat, one caveat is there's kind of two big buckets of transuranic waste. There's waste that's in storage in the central waste complex already, and then there are transuranic materials that are out in the buildings like Bee Canyon and Redox, and also in some of the old processing discharge trenches from PFP. I would call that contamination. The soil, when it's dug up, will be transuranic waste. The material, when it's removed from the canyons, will be transuranic waste. There is not a schedule for managing that waste that will be transuranic waste and will be dealt with under the CERCLA regulations.
And if it's helpful too, really quick, that we had a comment period on M91 that was out in the spring of 2021. When was those milestones established after?
It would have been signed at the same time. Same.
Okay. 2021.
The question has come up though with the letter from the governor of New Mexico to DOE, basically saying you won't be open for Hanford transfers. And so I think this is kind of something we need some discussions on this.
Sure. More to come on that. So Ed Holbrook in our office is authoring a letter to the state of New Mexico commenting on the permit. And we are providing them with information about what our volume of transuranic waste is and giving them more information so that they can project how long WIP would have to be open to accommodate our waste. So I think that letter, when it comes out, will be helpful to you. And we'll submit that letter before the end of their public comment period, which I don't remember the exact date, but it's later this month.
So before this advice would be considered by the full board.
That's correct.
So would you recommend eliminating that? Or rewording this?
I would eliminate that as it is now. I would say, let's wait and see what the ecology letter says about the WIP permit modification or potential modification.
Again, part of the reasons why is this came under the category of risk reduction. And it seemed very important that if we don't have a path, we're going to be in problems. And
yeah, so
I'm assuming the path doesn't exist as much, but there's not going to be a facility.
Well, potentially they would close it down. So I might suggest you might want to split these out as two different topics because I think the TBI waste and the TSCR processed waste is quite a different situation than the transuranic waste. And you might want to rephrase the transuranic waste to express concern about potential early closure of WIP.
I think because information's maturing on this and we don't know it, so maybe we should strike the entire advice point.
I think that would make
more
sense
simple
now.
What do you think? I think we strike, yeah, what do we just strike that whole RRD?
I think I'm listening to comments and discussion on it.
Yeah.
My area of expertise is not in waste disposal or true waste, so I'm writing down what people tell me and listening.
And RAP will also have a conversation about this as well at its meeting in March. So do you not feel like you have to come to total resolution on this? Because there's another committee going to look at it.
Well, in fact, I had an offline discussion with Rob a little bit this morning on this because Tom Cecilia has announced that he wants to have an IM team on this exact topic. And he's announced a date for a preliminary meeting on that, with an agenda to follow. I was thinking that maybe we need to see what comes out of that IM, because that may be a more appropriate place for some type of advice topic than this right now as a work priority.
Right. And they're on deck for the 28th or 29th of February, I think is what 28th at 9:30 in the morning. So
We'll take this out.
I've got Tom Galeotto, you've been waiting. Thank you.
No problem, Ruth. Two comments, if you will. On the first item, and I don't see it on the screen, can you go back to the first item that you showed on the DF law? Yeah, that's the one. TWA. Chris, you mentioned that, I'm sorry, it was TWC, the high level waste facility was the one I really wanted to comment on. The TPA milestone comment had, at least from my perspective, had some meaning in this item because the current TPA milestones show that hot startup of the pre-treat facility and the high-level waste facility itself were to be accomplished in fiscal 2023. 2033. And based on comments that DOE has made recently and some letters that have been shared back and forth that I've seen, that is at high risk of being missed. So the fact that the TPA milestone comment is stated here, in essence, means that we're still shooting for 2033. We want that to happen. We don't want to slip that schedule. That Chris, that was my belief in the wording on that item. I just wanted to highlight that's why it was in there. Go ahead.
So if we say accomplish the current WTP high level waste facility operational startup per milestone, blah, blah, blah.
We can say that, and I can give you that. Ryan has provided some information, and I appreciate that, Ryan, that you did that. I can give you some of that information as well for the specific milestone. It was actually a hot startup, as I recall. I'd have to look at it again. But I'll give you some words on that, Chris, for your consideration.
Okay.
The other comment, Ruth, if you could move down again to the one we were on the offsite shipments. If I interpreted or understood Mia's comments earlier about the Hanford Challenge position, I understand that you've given additional information on the what has changed since the 90s when grout was, if you will, lost favor, till now, where it seems grout has made major progress in terms of structure and longevity and leachability issues. That it is now back in the forefront of treating low activity waste. If I understood, Mia, your statements that the Hanford Challenge might be supportive of that, that's great. Because we're going to need, it looks like to me from everything that I've heard recently from the NAS and the FFRDC study and concerns about the budget overall and cleanup, long-term cleanup at Hanford, that we're kind of heading in that direction. And it would be helpful to lay out the specific needs for the various organizations within the HAB as to how what they need to know about grout in order to ultimately accept it, if you will. So that's my comment. I'd like to have that established information so that we can move forward and know where we are and how we're going to solve it. Thank you.
It's actually, Tom, I will confess, I just muted you because I know you're in a place with a lot of distraction. So next time you're in queue, make sure you unmute yourself. Chris, we've got like.
I got you.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know what you heard or didn't hear. I'm glad to hear that Hanford Challenge seems to be willing to discuss grout. I think we need to establish a list of information that we as a board need in order to make assessments for our individual groups, if you will, on the grout decision ultimately. So I would recommend that we consider listing those kinds of things, partially what Mia had suggested and some others as well that were discussed at the full HAB meeting a couple weeks ago. Thank you.
I just pointing out, folks, is that in the Teams, there is a file, I am grout. I am grout file has a number of documents in it, dating clear back into, I don't know, say 82, when some of the grout was first being done, and then some of the more new and recent discoveries, including some discussions on the WSU PNL, the Hanford Grout 5 and Hanford Grout 4. So I will continue to put stuff in there, in that file, but I encourage people to read it. I'd like to assemble a bunch of questions that then we can go find resources or ask DOE to provide us with resources to answer those questions. Thank you.
So Liz Matson, who's also from the same organization as Mia, has added a different way of saying what Mia just said.
Perfect.
So if you are online, you can see that. Liz, Mia, do you want me to read this? Because not everybody's online, so not everybody can see it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so I'm just going to read what Liz typed. Just to reiterate Mia's points about Hanford Challenge's position on grout and SLA. We do not think there is sufficient information about grouting tank waste to allay Hanford Challenge's concerns related to off-site disposal, cost and schedule projections, what waste would be in the final grouted waste form, and how much it may leach out, and timing prioritization. We believe the focus should be on vitrifying Hanford's tank waste, and budget is tight just to do that. There are important decisions to make about how to replace the pre-treatment facility and options for what that would look like, and additional budget to solve these problems. We also believe there needs to be a transparent public process about off-site disposal to ensure consent and avoid bounce back or orphaned waste. We're happy to endorse getting more information about all of these issues. Hopefully that also helps address your question.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, they're both in sync and absolutely, I think, as Tom reiterated, it's an opportunity for us to see how we can, really highlight.
You think Liz would mind if we cut and pasted that into the meeting minutes?
Liz, are you okay cut and pasting that into the meeting minutes?
The session's recorded, correct?
The session is recorded, so.
Plus Bruce just wanted to comment on that, so.
Yeah.
All right. We've got a little over 5 minutes. Chris, what else do you want to cover from the backside of this page with this committee?
Well, since John Price is here, I think looking at the accelerated cleanup activities, we know about the adaptive milestones and what the adaptive milestones are going to do. But a number of these waste sites like SW2, WA1 were actually scheduled to go to the field 6 or 7 years ago. And so I think there's some impatience on the part of the HAB that we'd really like to get started on these and not run the risk in the adaptive milestone process having pushed out even further than they are now. So that's why we put these down as a possible acceleration should funding become available. And not necessarily these, there is a for example. And so that opens the door for if there's a higher priority thing, should the funding become available, we'd really like this to get on with the plan.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense.
And we'd like to see some acceleration again if the funding becomes available for the contaminated soil beneath 324. See if we could bring that forward as well too. And then lastly, the RAWP Rev 1 indicates that PW 135 and CW 5, some of those are supposed to actually begin this year. But I understand that that's not funded and there's been a revised schedule submitted, which I can't find anywhere. But since it was originally supposed to start in FY23 or in FY23, if funding can become available, we'd like them to start in FY25.
Yeah, and that last one you read is one of the activities that will generate transuranic waste, and that is not currently on a schedule for being shipped to WIP. So that's something that EPA and Ecology repeatedly asked DOE to get scheduled. So we're still working with them on
that. And then the other two, the workforce issues, which you mentioned yesterday, everybody has read in the news, heard on TV about demographic trends in the workforce. And the concern here is not next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, but 30 to 50 years from now, is the workforce going to be available to meet the schedule, cleanup schedule that the tri-party agencies have planned, the milestones. So we're asking DOE to put together a plan accounting for these demographic trends that are beginning to emerge, on how they expect to have a workforce available in the far out years to be able to continue cleanup on the schedule that it would like to clean up the site on. That is by 2078 and all the intermediate paths leading to 2078. And then lastly is the Hanford funding. We've all heard Brian Vance say, I think everybody's aware that we're in an era of constrained funding. Constrained funding is Brian Vance's words. And when you look at the life cycle cost document that was issued in February of last year, it requires $5 to $7 billion in multiple year periods to finish the cleanup in the scheduled cleanup by 2078. At the rate that Hanford is getting funding, it's unlikely to get $5 to $7 billion a year. And so what we've asked for is to put together a plan how it's going to address Hanford cleanup, much less accelerated, if it doesn't get that funding and gets funding on the order of continued $2.7, $2.8 billion a year. So I'd like to see a plan on that. And that's the indirect supporting activities. Now, we had some discussion a little bit yesterday on a different matter, but we don't have anything in here specifically for safety. And the reason is that safety at Hanford, like MinSafe, it's assumed to be funded. We know that it's unacceptable to DOE, to the workforce, actually to Congress, not to fund safety at the priority it needs to be funded to conduct the work activities. So we left that in the words that we understand that this will be funded. It's a priority for DOE, but we haven't put it down specifically here for that reason. We say that in words, but it's not in the table.
Final questions or comments for Chris? So the path forward, as this advice evolves, is going to go to the RAP committee in March. We've got a request out to HSEP about, do they want a committee call to talk about this as well? There is an IM team call for this IM team on the 16th of February for the purposes of putting together the final draft advice, which will go to the BCC for a half-day meeting.
No, I thought it was March 13th.
Is it March 3rd?
Yeah.
You're right, it's March.
Because.
It's the middle of March.
We wanted to get input, possible input from the RAP committee
Sorry, I got my months.
and from HSAP before we have another IM team meeting.
Right, so the IM team, wrong page.
I've done.
IM team is March 14th.
I have
No.
March 16th from yesterday.
Yeah, March 16th up, yeah, you're right. March 16th for the IM team. And then March 28th, BCC will have a half-day meeting to be sure the advice is approved by the at the committee level to go to the April board meeting. So March 16th, IM team, March 28th, BCC, April board meeting. The schedule kind of got all messed up yesterday.
We're gonna get a new schedule on Thursday.
So yeah, so the updated dates that look 4 to 6 weeks out come out on the Thursday updates. Because things have been a little bit more fluid than normal. Brian?
Erie, are we gonna get, sorry, you're right there, right? Are we gonna get the HAB work plan calendar updated with those dates and put that online too, in addition to the weekly notice? Yes. Okay, I figured.
Yeah, so get that fixed as well. That's it. Right on time.
Just as a point to note, in the FRDC, we did cost estimates on the budgets needed for Hanford. And one of their charts showed up that we're $1 billion underfunded now. And it's going to be in a couple of years, we're going to need $4 billion here to accomplish the goals we have. And it's only rising. They also mentioned that it's one of these options that they had was the grouting offsite was a $31 billion project. And part of the cost reduction came in the early start of being able to get it offsite. You know, I found some of those numbers were very, very prudent to understand how much escalation our budgets can be. Second thing is, I think that Tri-Cities is going to be very healthy for many years to come.
Oh, all right. So we are down to number 7, committee business. Because we moved up the conversation on the FFRDC and NAS meetings, we've basically got 2 chunks here. One is this committee's discussion about the operations work group and looking at how to improve committees, for which we have Chris again. He's doing double duty. As well as talking about the next tank waste meeting, which is scheduled for May. So 2 items. Is there anything else we need to cover under committee business?
Just the only thing I think of is read the literature that comes out. If you find something interesting, put yellow marks on it or whatever, highlight it, and put it on that Teams database, and feel free to start communicating that way. I read these documents, and when I go through, I have a way of reading a technical document that's 100 pages, 300 pages. And I really look at the conclusions and then look at the facts that bring up the conclusions. One of the very interesting things that I felt about the FRDC is that high-level waste homogeneity is very important for the process, in that it has to be homogeneous to make the right kind of glass. And where is that homogeneity going to exist? And that came within the direct feed high-level waste discussions that they had, is how are we going to make sure this solid liquid, because our double shell tanks don't have mixers in them. They solids just settle on the bottom. So anyway, just
Right. Chris.
I want to mention one thing. I mentioned it to Rob, but I gave a talk at a professional meeting in London at the English Professional Society for Engineers or something. I forget the exact name of it, on the entire grouting process at Fernald from beginning to end. And a lot of the things that we've been concerned about here is waste disposal, shipping, waste acceptance criteria, grout recipes. I address how we handled it, at least at one site.
And a lot of the issues that we had to address there will have to be addressed here. It's a different waste form, different situation, but the issues will have to be addressed, albeit in different form. But I can give that presentation again. It'd be about half an hour long. There's some 20 or 30 PowerPoint slides in it, but I think it'd be informative to people because this was a major effort at a DOE site. And this is the last thing that had to be done at Fernald before we turned out the lights and left.
Was that waste in silos?
Pardon?
Was it the waste in the silos that?
It was.
Okay.
And it was unique, not because it had high levels of radioactivity, but because it was the residue of waste from the Shinko mine and the Belgian Congo. It had a very high uranium content. And so as a decay, as a daughter decay product, you have radium-226, which then decayed to radon-222. And in the headspace in the silos, the highest concentration of radon in the world. It was 200 million picocuries per liter. And it was a large point source of it. When it started leaking out of the silos, which originally got Fernald on the Superfund site, it was the largest point source of radon gas in the world.
Okay, so I'm gonna suggest we bucket that under looking at the next meeting. And when we get there, I'm also gonna nag you a bit about how do you balance how much technical you need to know to stay at a policy level. I know it's like a bouncing ball. You have to get a bit into the technical to get back up to the policy. But you all are really good at getting into the technical. And I don't want to lose our new folks and scare them off by going too far into the technical. So you've been nagged.
So my suggestion would be that his presentation be given to the IM meeting on grout. And then we have a good discussion. I would also like to see at that IM meeting, discussion PNNL on their new invented grout 5 and grout 3. It's very important studies. WSU and PNNL have been in a joint research program for, I think, 3 years now.
So when we get to the point of requesting the IMT meetings, we just need to be really focused about what you want to cover in that request for that meeting. So that it's clear what we're going to do. All right. Back to the agenda, just all about making committees work better. And we've got a number of folks here who are on in the operations work group. So Chris has been tagged to talk first, but you've got multiple perspectives in the room. And Sue and Jan and Gary and Mike and Brian. Yeah.
Right. So anybody who wants to jump in and add, modify, feel free to do so as I go along. Tom and I gave an overview at the last board meeting of the efforts of this work group dealing with both committee optimization and document optimization. And really today I'm going to be talking about the former because we have a lot of work to do on that. And as I think we'll mention later on, we'll probably try and get a lot of this done at a committee of the whole meeting coming up in March. Now, to take a cue from Mike, when he jumped in yesterday, learned from Mike, we got started on this because in looking at the documents we had, under descriptions of what the committees were responsible for, what they felt their scope were, was the wording was different in different documents regarding committee scope. The other thing is it wasn't clear that we were entirely consistent in the wording in the documents with requirements either in the EMS SAB charter or in the tri-party agency
memorandum of understanding. And so the drivers for this were to make the wording consistent in the documents and to make them consistent with requirements in the agency, in the MOU, and in the EMSSAB charter. Now, what we did is we used the backboard in this room, and we had a bunch of sticky notes, and we had sticky notes which took requirements from the EMSSAB charter and we put them on the board. And we had sticky notes which took requirements from the MOU and we put them on the board. And then the operations work group, different members of it, made up sticky notes to add to those based upon past, current, anticipated Hanford cleanup activities and what we felt the HAB had issued advice on in the past. So in other words, we added detail to the EMSSAB sticky notes and to the MOU sticky notes. And what I'm going to show, and out of the sticky notes then, we grouped them. Which of the sticky notes seemed to fall in the same kind of groupings. And we wound up with 5 groupings of sticky notes. And I want to show you what these groupings are. And these are pictures of the sticky notes. And I've called them groupings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to avoid putting names on them. That's something that we'll have to do in the COTW meeting in March. But grouping number 1, I'll read through the sticky notes because it's not clear that everybody will be able to see them on screen. Safe and efficient mission, execution and completion. Spending priorities, cost of cleanup, risk assessment and management. Now, risk assessment here is not environmental risk assessment or ecological risk assessment. It's the risk that your cleanup activity exceeds the schedule and exceeds the cost, or can't be completed because of technical problems. Spending priorities, funding priorities, cleanup budget and funding, cost of cleanup, duration of cleanup, and then there were some regarding legalities and TPA milestones, which we wound up lumping in here too. Local legal agreements, safe, effective, Hanford execution, completion. And let me put this down now. Ruth reminded me yesterday during the presentation, sometimes there's a repetition of the sticky notes. They say exactly the same thing in 2 sticky notes. And this is because 2 documents, say the EMSSAB charter and MOU, said exactly the same things. And so the sticky notes reflected one from one document and another from another document. That's why you see some duplication in wording of sticky notes. We have effective conduct of operations, regulatory milestone progress, TPA changes, and TPA content. And the emphasis on TPA is not a technical emphasis or necessarily the type of work that's to be done, but more the schedule and funding requirements, because we know that Congress funds milestones. And so this is more in the funding realm rather than the technical work arena realm. Grouping 2, we have worker protections, nuclear material stabilization, waste storage, waste treatment, waste management and disposition, nuclear materials management and disposition, waste disposal, nuclear materials disposition, waste management and disposition, technology activities, technology development, and transfer. So that was a grouping 2 that we had. Grouping 3, outreach and engagement, community values and concerns, public involvement strategies, effective information transfer, public involvement strategies, and communications.
grouping 4, cleanup, duration of cleanup, groundwater protection, contaminated groundwater restoration, effective conduct of ops, cleanup science, cleanup standards, impacts to the Columbia River, local legal requirements, waste and hazardous materials transport, worker protection, regulatory milestone project progress, TPA content, technology activities, TPA changes, technology development and transfer, excess facility, relation of treaty rights and cleanup, relation of treaty rights and cleanup, and risk assessment. And risk assessment here is human risk assessment, ecological risk assessment, environmental risk assessment. It doesn't relate to project management, that type of risk. So this was our 4th grouping that we had. And then the 5th grouping that we had was future land use, long-term stewardship, environmental restoration, long-term end states, maintenance, restart, or D&D of contaminated facilities, long-term stewardship, ecological values, environmental restoration, workforce community impact for Hanford, transition and downsizing, resources, rural resources protection, restoration. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Relation of treaty rights and cleanup, release of Hanford lands, excess facilities, regional and local public health and safety, and future land use. So these were the 5 groupings that the work group came up with. And to try and summarize those, we put them into this diagram that was shown at the board meeting. And I want to start on the right-hand side, and let's ignore the bottom box that says leadership, because that's referring to the EIC, and that really was not a grouping type thing, but it is a kind of a standing committee. But the other ones that we put arbitrarily labels on is Waste Treatment, Storage, and Management Committee. This would be an expansion of the Tank Waste Committee today, expansion of scope. Outreach and Engagement would be the PIT Committee, Health and Safety. Now, you didn't see much in the groupings in health and safety. There's a lot of discussion on this because health and safety cross-cuts all the technical work that's done at Hanford, and office work too. And we felt that at the first shot, health and safety is so important to DOE that we felt that it might be sending the wrong message if we took it out, made it something cross-cutting. So I left it as a standalone committee. Then the long-term stewardship and land use committee, and I don't think we have an analog committee for that today, a standalone committee. And cleanup and closure would be the RAP committee with some expanded scope. Now, on the left-hand side of this is what, for lack of a better word, or at the time being, we've called resource teams. And this especially where there's going to have to be discussion and a number of things decided at the committee of the whole meeting. But we felt that items, a lot of what the BCC does today, or if we were to expand the BCC scope, that kind of cross-cuts everything else too. So spending, funding, life cycle cost, scope, schedule, milestones, that kind of thing is all cross-cutting. And so we put things over here that we felt could be a resource to the other committees. They cross-cut, provide information. We added some things like permitting, waste and environmental permitting. We don't really discuss that very much in any current committees. So all of these things could be cross-cutting, and we anticipate a fair bit of discussion. The idea is that these permanent resource teams would have a potential time slot for input at every committee meeting. Now, based on discussion yesterday and using my familiarity with the BCC, I can't necessarily see that there'd be that
if we expanded the scope of the BCC to include some of these, that me or someone else would necessarily have something to say at every single other committee meeting. There might be a couple times a year that it was important, but not necessarily every meeting. So Rob, I think one of your concerns yesterday was that this could eat up a lot of time at committee meetings, but I don't think it has. I think only when it's important enough, and that's where communication between leader of the resource teams and the committee chair would have to come to agreement. And it can come either way, from the committee down, say, hey, we think we need to talk about this, or from the resource team committee, hey, there's something that's come up, maybe you guys aren't aware of, it affects your committee in some way. So this is where we stand today. The path forward is to try and flesh out the details of all this. How is it really going to work? What does it mean? How do people get on these things? So on and so forth. What the relationships are at the COTW coming up in March. And then I think the idea is April that the HAB as a whole has to come to consensus agreement on it, or is it later on in the year?
I think we were shooting for April.
Yeah.
I'm looking at ops
Well,
work
for
group people.
implementation in October.
Yeah, for implementation later in the year, but to agree on this is the way that we'd like to work the committees and the resource teams. We'd like to come to a consensus on that in April.
So the timeline that we're currently trying to work to is having this conversation with all of the committees. The ops work group would then meet on, the committee of the whole is March 7th. The ops work group would meet on March 9th, which is pretty tight, but we're all in town. Put together its recommendations to go to the EIC. I'm recommending that the EIC meet on March 29th. That gives the ops work group time to get its ducks in a row. The EIC to approve any recommendations from the operations work group to go to the full board, and it gives us time to actually get all that information in the packet so board members have a chance to look at it before the meeting. So that's the timing.
And by going to the committee meetings like today and the pick yesterday, we're hoping for discussion and comments from the committees, especially unique to what they see as their potential scope going forward, expanded scope, or even the renaming of the committees. So any discussion, comment that anybody has would be welcome.
Tom Gallioto's in queue. And Pam. Tom?
Yes, thank you. And I apologize for my last excursion into your meeting with my phone ringing and everything else. If it rings again, I'll try to sit on it. I have a number of questions and I'm trying to work through with Tridec to pass them on officially to the committee, the working group committee. So I won't go through those now, but I wanted to make sure that we'll have the opportunity to get those comments to the team for more clarification. So hopefully that it can be, those issues can be addressed at the committee of the whole. And I presume that that's where they should be addressed. So just wanted to tell you that that's a heads up, and we'll be sending something to the working group here shortly. Thank you.
Right. Tom, if you can get whatever comments or questions you have to the facilitation team by Valentine's Day, that gives us a week to incorporate those to make sure that the agenda either touches on them or offers an opportunity for discussion and resolution. Because the committee's full agenda is supposed to go out on February 21st.
Okay, so I'll get them to you 15th. Is that fair?
Yeah, the 14th or 15th would be the most helpful, so it gives us a little bit of time.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
I've got Pam and you.
When we first saw this, I heard a lot of folks express concerns about what's in the circle. And how that would work. In the context of this being the budget committee people, it makes sense. Because budget impacts all of these different committees. And maybe the schedule and milestone issue, but waste and environmental permitting, it's those are issues that are going to go to the tanks committee and the RAP committee as part of their normal conversation. So I don't think you've got consensus on what's in the circle right now. I think that makes the committees make sense the way they're proposed, but resource team, I'm hearing people are not comfortable with that concept.
In particular, though, Pam, you don't like the idea of the waste and environmental permitting in there.
Yeah, I don't think it makes sense. I think that if you think about what budget and contracts have done over the years and expand that makes a lot of sense. I'm seeing Ryan shake his head. So.
In agreement, yes. I think that's a conversation we've had, is that bucket, that circle is off-putting, it's too big, there's too much in it. So I just nodding vigorously to agree.
I have a comment on Pam's comment if I could. So I agree. So in the construct as this was rolling out, there were just a couple items that were, I think, discussed for, what are we calling that, resource teams. And then in its iteration, it grew. I know where it grew, but it grew. And then I began to have some of the same concerns. I think some of those things that are actually listed in the circle, if we looked at that aggregate of things that potentially the HAB could get advice on, and they would be there, they would dovetail nice, their fit under some of the committees. And I think we've got an opportunity to go back and take a look at that and say, okay, can we parse that down to the critical few, to where it's optically and aesthetically more pleasing and understandable, but then also can be implemented. So, sure.
Thanks. I had a text message from Shelley Simone conversation. What? I know. It's like, I'm sorry, Shelley, I wasn't part of this process. I don't know. Just cracked me up. I hadn't heard from her in months.
Well, in defense of the work group, folks were on a roll. There was an amazing amount of synergy happening in the community, and might have gotten out ahead of our headlights just a little bit, but it's good to discuss.
And part of the issue, and Dan's next, part of the issue is you've got, technical committees, like I liken it to a basket weave. You've got technical committees and you've got cross cutters, and how do you want that relationship to work in terms of committee work and HAB work? And that's the tension, because like you said, budget hits everything, right? So that's a cross cutter. It's what do you do with that other stuff that's kind of cross cutting? Dan.
So what I've been hearing is very similar to that. First of all, people were kind of worrying about, hang on.
No, I know. Giving her this signal.
That's right.
Worrying about the cost too, because in the end, the HAB is only like, 16 primary seats, right? And everybody can be in all the committees. There's no restriction anymore on the number of committees that you can participate in. And I think when we started working with the circle, we put in budget, that because it's cross-cutting, and we had health and safety, which has subsequently been moved back to the right-hand side. So then the language changed from resource team to resource teams. And I think that we don't have enough people to man all the kind of potential slots. And I think that given that all the activities, except from budgeting, is reflected on the right-hand side, that we need to kind of conceptualize this cross-cutting potential as people who find a certain topic that they're interested in and want to keep up on. And if we make a place in the agenda for these kind of cross-cutting issues, those people will naturally emerge. And I can think of an example from the RAP committee several years ago. We had a gentleman who found what was interesting, new books that have been published or something like that. He made a kind of a, not a book report, but he would point out things that we might want to be interested in our, and he just did that as a volunteer thing. He was already on the RAP committee. But you see what I mean, is that there's a potential there with the concept is kept, is that people will maybe self-identify for things that they want to talk about, life cycles, or analysis of alternatives, or, you know, so that people are kind of kept up to date on what's going on that doesn't actually maybe, you know, get slotted in any one of the committees. So I think that the circle has value, but it needs to be kind of pared down as more like an invitation. Oh.
I again had mentioned before is I just don't see how this really fits our membership being a 2-year cycle. And in particular, this blue box at the very bottom on the left, permanent IM teams, resource teams. So what constitutes a permanent? I mean, is their term going to extend through multiple years? I just don't quite understand. Or is a permanent IM team resource, whatever, could it be, would it be non-HAB people? Okay, I just don't understand what we're trying to do with this. The second thing is like I said, is our meeting windows are very tight, and I don't know that there's that many. If people are interested in those subjects, they're in those committees. If they're not in those committees, why would they be a resource? You know, I just think that it. Over the years, we've had a lot of people migrate towards certain committees for where they're very proficient and they can understand the issues. Health and safety is one in particular. I think tankway, even RAP committee. So many discussions in RAP committees were all about groundwater and leakage to the river and barriers and things of what we're going to do there. You know, those people in the meetings became the experts. The committee itself becomes that. And I just think that if we have people just, oh, I guess I'll show up this meeting because I'm a resource guy and I'm going to tell you what I think. You know, you can do that anyway. You don't need the structure to do that. I mean, we're all open meetings. We can have multiple committee memberships. So like I said, I think I'd like to see it fleshed out, what a permanent IM team person is. And do they get a special badge? You know? And anyway, I'll leave my comments to that.
Brian, and then Steve.
Yeah, I think I can clarify this point. If you're a member of the permanent resource team, that would not extend your HAB term at all. So if you're, just for an example, if you start your first ever HAB term in year 1, you join a resource team in year 2, regardless, you still only got 4 years left on your, because it's the 3 sets of 2 years. So, and Gary, correct me if I'm wrong as I'm talking about this, but so that would not, being a part of a resource team, just the same way as you're part of a committee, would not impact your extend or decrease your term limits. And I think we talked earlier that I think we all agree that there's a lot of confusion and uncomfortableness with the list and the size of that list. And there's certainly things that we need to look at removing or reworking and explaining better. That being said, if I could offer maybe a little more clarity, we have existing IM teams that for like a specific committee, like the grout IM team that's specific to the tank waste. I think the idea for the resource teams, and again, maybe that's not the best name for them, is that cross-cutting topic like BCC. That's why we imagine that, like the idea of budget, cleanup priorities, which if you look at the process for the cleanup priorities advice on a yearly basis, currently, we've got Chris going to every single committee meeting and presenting on cleanup priorities, getting input from each committee on the cleanup priorities advice. And I think that was the idea behind a resource team where there's a topic like budget, funding, cleanup priorities that truly does touch every single committee, like the annual advice that you guys do on cleanup priorities. So I think maybe hopefully that helps a little bit, and maybe Gary or Mike can expand, or somebody else can expand if they want to expand on what I said. But I definitely agree that we need to revisit the circle, provide better explanation, and try and answer everybody's questions and concerns. So.
Yes.
On this topic.
Yes.
So I've got Stephen Q.
The yes is yes to everything he said, Brian said. So I want to back up a little bit if I can, at risk of restating something maybe everybody already understands. So how this first came up was new guy, me, looking at all the documents. There were at least 3 different documents that communicated the name of and purpose of the committees. They were different. Okay. So we have 3 documents saying different things about the committees. Objective number 1, hey, can we get them to say the same thing? And in that discussion, it was realized that, we've got a number of documents that talk about in different ways the number of things that the HAB could potentially provide policy level advice on. And not one document was the same. Again, from the MOU to the Mississippi Charter, not necessarily in that order. Your operating ground rules document and process manual to some extent also. So then the objective became, okay, do the committees that we have appropriately represent those, and I'm going to use this term for lack of a better term at the moment, interests or subjects, right? Are the subjects appropriately represented by the committee so that there's some clarity in what committee is able to provide advice on, develop advice on X, whatever that might be. Follow me so far, everyone? Okay, so the other aspect of this is that you hear me when I speak at the introductions at the board meetings that I give my DDFO spiel, and it says, hey, and I don't know what they are, I'm just too old to remember that stuff, right, frankly. There was a time when I could, but it's gone. So it's a general, a high level binning, if you will, or remarks on what we are trying to achieve with respect to policy level advice from the HAB. And so the initial comment was, hey, let's use those as a starting point for the bins. And you can see that, let's take leadership off because that's EIC. We've established that. But they changed, they evolved a little bit, and I think are still fairly representative of those things that I speak to. And it doesn't have to be verbatim, it never did. But initially the purpose was, out of the universe of things that was communicated to us that the HAB could be expected to provide or was requested to provide policy level advice on, we've been done, okay? And I think where we've evolved here and there, our understanding today is that the circle, we need to work on that. There's some confusion, we need to work on that. There's some additional information, we need to work on that. But I don't think I've heard anyone say, and this is an opportunity for my colleagues that participate in the work group to challenge my remarks, is that what we were developing was something that was intended to be more onerous, is in fact just the opposite, more efficient.
So in the handouts we got of this are not in color, but I don't know if you noticed as Chris was going through it, the Post-its were all like different colors. What I didn't confess to the group when we kicked this off was each color represents the source document that said, y'all can give advice on these topics. So, and so the sort was pretend there are no committees and this is your charge, give us advice on these topics and bunch them up. And then like day 2 or day 3, I finally told them where it all came from. But the idea was to try to do kind of the committee version of zero-based budgeting, start from scratch and the purpose and see what happens. And I can tell you, I didn't know if they were going to come up with the committees you have now or something different. And there's a little bit of mapping to what you have now to this. But that was the idea of if we have things that currently are either
out of alignment, or in a couple places, just plain contradictory. How do we start to get that stuff all in alignment? And like Chris said, that's why there's some duplicate stuff, because there's duplicate stuff in the documents. But that was the rationale of take a big step back and see how to best make it clearer, more in alignment, and hopefully more streamlined. And then the circle part was, oh yeah, and then there's just stuff like the annual cleanup priorities advice that crosscuts everything. And what do we do with that? Is it a standalone committee, or is it some other more nimble way to meet that need? And do we need a standing committee that is really busy 4 months of the year and less busy the rest of the year? So there was a sense in the group of, okay, how do we make this thing work better?
I just kind of wish for clarity. We would have kept some of the monikers that we had before, just because we don't want to lose people. I mean, it was very clear before that RAP committee had these activities. Long-term stewardship, I think we've been told they're not advancing anything in that area, and why should we care about it? Whereas health and safety, we're all the time. And so, I don't know. I guess, you know, we have this long established way of doing things, and to change it now, I can understand making the documents right, but why weren't we make the documents to what we were rather than and what we were and what worked rather than something new? And that's my, I just.
So many new people though.
Yeah, I can. Steve, yeah, jump in here.
I kind of saw it from a different perspective, but one that has been brought up. We've got a lot of new people, and the expectation is to try to help bring them along. So I saw the resource circle as more of the old tribe that really understands and is willing to deep dive, not discounting what new people bring, but as a resource to helping encourage those new participants that maybe don't want to go through the 300-page document or even have feasible time to do that, but definitely want to hear what Rob has to say in summary of what he's just been enlightened on by DOE or by, you know, another entity or agency that has something that they think should be shared. So I kind of like that part of it, because sometimes I have to say, you know, I may not have read all of the stuff that I probably should be privy to, but if there was a resource related to what we're trying to do, which is sound advice that you could reference to say, you know, I know Chris isn't on our group, but, you know, I think he brings a certain interest that and experience that I think we ought to hear from. And also from a resource perspective, if you're in that pool of talent, to be able to go, well, I think we should expand our understanding and group knowledge to reinforcing what new people might not be aware of either. So it's kind of that transfer of understanding and power and interests and beliefs that I saw kind of that resource core becoming. So as a new person, you know, unless I had some incredible background, I may not be a first-year participant in a resource, but after that, I may feel that I do have a place there that could help enlighten other people. So that was, you know, so I maybe it wasn't the intent, but that was what I also saw and listened to in the last few days from what you guys have discussed. I do like seeing things up there like long-term stewardship. Like, I mean, I think it's absolutely important and vital if you want to keep tribal interests to talk about, you know, what should happen in the future here. It's not a part of it now. You rename that. Is that going to be a part of it? But they're just kind of my comments. Yes, keep it simple.
I really like that approach. I really like the idea that that the team leaders are actually members that participate in those committees. So for my tank waste committee, I would say that whoever is representing this body of SMEs or whatever, they would come from the tank waste committee. You know, and I mean, if that's what it is. The other thing is I really like about this, it's like what's Chris doing now. is lobbying the advice in the various committees before we take it to the main board. And I think that will make our board meetings much more efficient. And so I do like this approach. And I know it's time consuming. He's got to be at 5 different meetings to explain the point of the advice, but boy, oh boy.
So, but the last history piece I will give you before we move on, and Pam, I don't know if she's forgiven me 22 years later, but the first committee of the whole, which I inflicted on you, was on committee restructure.
And we said no.
I know, they did. They hated me then, and they probably still hate me now. For example, the Budgets and Contracts Committee was called Dollars and Cents, SENSE. Yeah, and it was.
But they have to have their own budget.
And ORP had just been created, so now there were 2 Hanfords, right? And we had regulators, how many committee meetings do I have to go to? There were reasons that we came together and said, whoa, the old system, which had been around for, at that point, about 6 years maybe, didn't fit as well. And we deliberately, as a group, and we had little squeaky hammers, we renamed everything, whether it needed to be or not, to help the group move out of the potential for getting stuck in the past and move into a different way to structure the committees. And it's been 22 years, I think. So that's why the names are different. And I will tell you, I'm going to shamelessly lobby to rename everything just to help move forward and not get stuck in the pieces of the past that may not serve you now.
For example, we had a health, safety, and waste management committee. All of health and safety, all of waste management. That was nuts. And I was the
You were the chair. She was the chair. She knows how nuts it was.
Yes.
So health and safety has always been there, but it has evolved through waste management to health, safety, environmental protection to whatever this thing might turn out to be. So my challenge is we went back to the source documents and it's okay if we rename them Fred and Sally. As long as the scope is in there. And for the committee of the whole, that's the idea. Get the scope clear, come up with some names, make sure that the circle isn't like scary and weird. So that the full board can look at it in April and make a decision.
If you start with it just being budget, I think it would over better.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Yeah. And then if something else comes up that's like the, oh my gosh, crosscutter, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it's not scary and front-loaded. Rob, the next meeting of the Tank Waste Committee is scheduled for May. And in the work plan, it says the topic is System Plan 10. Which sounds like a really big topic.
Right. Goodness. I do have a conflict with it.
With the 10?
Yeah, I do have a conflict with May.
Okay,
You have a vice though, Nick.
Yes.
You have,
we
you
have
have a vice.
That's right. That's right. And I don't expect to change anything. It's just that, man, that's a very important subject to talk about, system plan. And
What is the objective for that discussion?
yeah, this plan came out of the people that did our work planning calendar. And I think what they did, and maybe you can clarify, that there was 4 or 5 subjects in each of the committees
No, I mean,
that you're willing to discuss.
that you're going to talk about the system plan at the tanks meeting in May.
Right.
What is the objective for that discussion about related to the system plan? What do you want people to come away from that discussion with?
What? Let's see the system plan first. I think that, you know, I really would have put this in budgets, in the system plan, because a lot of the system plan is based upon the financials and the money and those outlays. And we saw some really good discussions in the FRDC of the projected costs and things of this sort. But clearly, you know, once you get 2 or 3 years out, it's less and less. It's more nebulous.
Are you talking system plan 9?
Yeah. And now they're going to go to system plan 10.
If I'm not mistaken, a year or two ago, Tank Waste or another committee, Dan McDonald and I think that somebody from DOE had an informal conversation with Tank Waste and another committee just to have feedback on just what year was that? Was that last year?
It was, I want to say just a few months ago.
Yeah, it was
Like June, July, August,
Something like
somewhere in that frame.
Yeah.
I want to say, yeah, it was August because they needed the input to feed into some stuff in the fall. So it was not consensus input, it was more round robin, what do you think?
Exactly.
And that's
Right.
that system plan 10.
And that should come out in November, thereabouts.
Oh, November. We want, yeah.
Yeah, that's what's in the work plan is system plan 10.
So at one time you mentioned to me that we can't change these titles from the work plan because we've coordinated with DOE for some sort of activity or something.
Gary said it was Jello.
And that if we're not going to have a system plan out, we want to see the results of the system plan.
So
Change them up.
Rob, suggest a change.
Yeah, well, they have to be approved, and then when they are, then I guess that's like go back.
Right.
Right.
Part of it is getting ahead of the curve enough. We had a meeting yesterday with the agencies and the incoming chair and vice chair around, you know, who's the right person to call to get help? And what's the lead time to actually get SMEs engaged, whether it's just to come and talk or whether it's a presentation. And DOE has a fairly complex approval process for things like formal presentations. As in, you know, best give them like 6 weeks. And so the question from Sue about if you've got a focus question or something you want to accomplish with System Plan 10 or a WTP update, knowing that now for a May meeting makes the agencies work a whole lot easier because they know, okay, I need to find this SME or I need to put together this kind of information. If we wait until 3 weeks before a meeting, because they're supposed to get agendas out 2 weeks before a meeting, there's this mad scramble and it's really hard on the agencies.
So the question is, if the system plan 10 discussion is not right for May, what Gary just said is propose an alternative. So what would you want the theme for the TWC meeting in May to be around? And what objective would you like people to go into that meeting expecting and come out with?
Right. Okay. So I can say that I'm real proud of the work DOE's done and the progress we've made. I do see on the 5-year or on our long-term plan, our 5-year plan outreach, that we do have several subjects in the area of TSCR or the new TSCR design, possibly answer some questions about what are your thoughts now of getting the waste in the west area over to the plant in the east area. I mean, you know, it's a pipeline that we're unsure of at this point. Those are the kind of questions I think Tank Waste has to look at. We also think that if our plan, you know, we've got 23 single shell tanks with known leaks or problems that we've emptied. And so it's probably about, and every couple of years we have another one. So we might have more in the response plan, what we're going to do with the tank leak response plan. That would be a great presentation. You know, what would we use for indications to say we do or don't? And then how we go forward with the response plan to another leak. You know, those two subjects areas I think are really important to us, especially with the SWAP. I'm always liking, I think our grout group, if we can schedule a meeting in March, something, we may be able to put something together to bring to the main the committee. So those three things. Anybody in the committee want to provide input? Vice chair or what do you think? Any desire to learn something new about tankways? Because we have a pretty narrow thing, operation of WTP and the tank farm transfers over to get it. Just was so important that the evaporator is also the subject we've all had because we're still planning on using the 242 evaporator for volume reduction. So
what we're discovering with the committees right now, and you all correct me if you screw this up, is having one or two really crisp focuses. If you said, you want to figure out where the TISCR columns go to be stabilized and disposed long-term, for example, I'm just making that up. So that it's the question is very clear, and then the agencies know, okay, that's the question we want to answer for that. So instead of a laundry list, which makes agenda building really hard, what are the top 2 or 3 things you want to deep dive into for that committee meeting? And like, what's the question you want to answer? So then if you've got 3, if one of them falls off, you still have 2. But if it's, I want to know about these 9 things, I'll never be able to fit it into your agenda for you.
I think I understand your point, and I was just bringing up 3 so people could please quit.
Oh, I just like to do due diligence and ask someone about the system plan. And I personally was under the impression from a prior meeting with ecology that something would be out in May to share. Maybe it's not the official system plan.
Yeah, I was gonna add to the system plan. I think Gary and I should touch base and check with our staff, see if that's something that's gonna be a timely topic or not. Because we haven't, we talked about that a little bit and maybe dropping it, maybe not. I think we need to go back and check with our staff to see what the status is on system plan 10 and if it's still timely to do a presentation. So we can go back and talk to our staff.
Okay.
I've got Pam and Dan Solitz in queue.
So the history of this tank waste committee, we had some experts that could read the system plan and understand it. I'm thinking of Dixon. And so the system plan is a requirement of the tri-party agreement. And it is to look at some alternatives, as I understand it, as we move forward with tank waste treatment. And this committee has recommended topics for the next system plan in the past, as well as looking at what it says. It is phenomenally complicated. And I don't want to wait down that path, frankly. And the topics that you just brought up, Rob, I think are timely and understandable. But if you have an issue manager team that's willing to read the damn thing, which is probably going to be about this high, and share with us a stakeholder perspective, that'd be great. But for the committee to get their arms around it is very challenging.
Right.
I mean, others.
I did it once.
Read one or looked at one, have any other thoughts?
I've got Dan Solitz and Jacob in queue. Dan, do you have a thought?
Yes. Will the National Academy of Sciences final report be done, and we can discuss that then? Is that timely? Seemed to me like it was, but perhaps not.
I don't know the date.
I don't know the schedule on that. We have to check.
Though I didn't, to tell you honestly, I didn't see a lot of difference between what they reported a couple of years ago and what they reported here recently. There's some new data from Savannah River, but some of those presentations were kind of similar to the ones we've seen before. But
well, once the final report's in, then the DOE's got to step up and start making some moves.
It's a recommendation. It isn't direction.
Yeah.
It's just an assessment report with information and opinions.
I would think that if there's room for an update on the system plan from the agencies, that would be fine, and we can discuss that at that point. And the second thing is if we get a subject, I would love to learn about this new TISCR or the new cesium removal process and how it's going to use the silicate the new silicate resins, or is it gonna end up, just what's the difference? And because I think that that's gonna explain a lot to the grout people of what they can expect to be grouted.
Mike, and I've got Jacob and.
I have a hard stop. And if you want to continue on, Gary will close out. I just want to let folks know I was stepping away from the table.
Okay.
I would just say that in the quest for knowledge, there's three things I always want to make clear is that the HAB is not oversight, the HAB is not regulatory agency, and the HAB is not a technical authority. So in the quest for the things that you want to learn, I think that it's a win-win if we try and find out a way to get some information in front of you, and in some cases not necessarily engage the entire committee or an entire body, because that comes at a cost, not only a cost of everybody's time, but a financial cost too. So I'm supportive to an extent. I just want to put that out there.
Thanks.
We had a great
appreciate it.
briefing from Tom Manager today. That was right on.
Yeah, we can relate that to him. It was a good discussion.
I've got Jacob and Hugh, and then we need to wrap up. Jacob?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, so my thought on the system plan, for several years when system plans were coming out, we had a meeting ahead of the system plan in order to get an idea of what sort of cases or things they were looking at, and so that we had a chance to weigh in on them before it was complete. Now, it turned out in actual practice, we're so cumbersome in writing advice and so forth that never realistically was going to influence the system plan. But, if we were going to have a system plan in May, it would, in my opinion, the things we would want to ask for is, what are you going to be in evaluating? What's going to be your criteria, and so forth, so we can get an idea of what might be coming. So I will say there's many subjects. I mean, I'm interested in just what's going on with WTP. So to me, there's a lot of different subjects, but the system plan's always interesting.
So as a reality check, the agenda for the tank weights meeting that is in May needs to go out.
It could be
a couple of days after the April board meeting, which means getting topics nailed down basically by the end of March. So new folks know we do agendas in batches of 6, which is there's 6 parties involved in any agenda. There's the chair and the vice chair of whatever committee you're working on, somebody from each of the TPA agencies. For this committee, EPA actually doesn't participate, but in my checklist, I include them, and then somebody from the facilitation team. So what we can do is we can put together a committee 6 call between now and the end of March to hammer out topics and key questions. So Gary and Ryan have enough time to figure out what's possible.
Sounds good. I would, when I said the May meeting on the 10th, I'll be back, after the 20th in May. So, if there's days after that, that would be fine.
So I understand Ryan and Gary are going to kind of meet and talk about this and what it's going to look like in May, the May timeframe. And that will craft the agenda, start the crafting the agenda next meeting.
Actually, yeah, and we'll have Ruth, we can get a call scheduled for that committee 6 call with Rob and agencies. That way we can, have that planning call to do that.
March 29th is committee call day.
Okay, cool.
So we'll just set that up on the 29th, and by then, hopefully we'll know a little bit more.
Although I think we need to get that figured out sooner than March 29th, I think. So Gary and I will do our due diligence. March 29th, that's like
What, a month?
A month away from now.
That's way too soon, or too close to the meeting.
Oh, wait a minute.
It's only February 8th.
Okay, February 28th is the February committee call day.
Okay.
So that's what we have to do.
That's better.
Yeah.
I was like,
Because,
March
yeah.
29th.
Sorry.
Yeah, right. The sooner we can get the agenda in the can, the sooner that it
Yeah,
can.
no, I'm a fan of sooner, so we'll do.
Yeah, no, I mean, I literally every month looks like a. Well, no, this is the expanded version of that. I don't scare people with this.
Yeah.
No. So, okay, so the tanks C6 call will be on the 28th. We'll work on the agenda for May. Right. Rob, you get the last word, and Gary, you get to do the protocol.
I would encourage anybody to give me a phone call or text me or send me an email if you want a subject brought up at our meeting on the 28th. There's something you want to hear. Other than that, I think we're done. Great.
In the words of our famous DEFO, Mr. Birkenbile, have a good day.
Thank you.